Chapter 701. The Death House, Part 2. The swarm of abominations surged forward in perfect unison, their blurred wings emitting a sound so grating it felt like claws raking across stone. Northern's grip tightened on the illusion blade, the weight of its presence settling into his hand like a trusted companion. He flapped his void wings once, steadying himself mid-air. His eyes darted from one abomination to another, each grotesque form blending into the mass of chaos. They weren't attacking recklessly. They were synchronized, moving as a single entity, guided by something unseen. The wings are coordinated, too coordinated. There was no time to ponder further. The lead abomination lunged, its serrated tongue slicing through the air like a whip. Northern tilted his head, the tongue's edge grazing the air next to his cheek. In one swift motion, he brought the illusion blade upward, severing the tongue with a precise strike. Blood sprayed, but he ignored it. Instead, he propelled himself forward, twirled his sword, and slashed at the abomination from beneath. One of the creature's hands flew off, gore spilling forth in a spiral pattern. The mournful bug buzzed erratically, emitting what seemed to be a guttural cry of pain. Northern didn't care, seeing that the creature hadn't died. His suspicions were confirmed. Northern rolled in the air as the creature lunged at him. Others were already approaching in a terrifyingly coordinated array. He slashed off the wing's root with a simple movement of his hand, quickly turning to deflect the next tongue with a swing of his sword. Northern watched with a sidelong glance as the mournful bug succumbed to death, falling lifelessly and splashing on the ground like a mound of flesh. So, it really is the wing. Northern had suspected since he saw them move that the real creature was the wing. The rest of the body, aside from the transparent wing, looked like a lifeless form carried by it. All of them were already closing in on him, the air trembling at the intensity of their approach. Northern transferred the illusion sword to his other hand and extended out his now free hand. Hidden Moon. Instantly, the air filled with thick, hot fog, like the aftermath of an intense fire. The abominations lost their sense of navigation. Because they had no eyes, Northern had suspected that using ordinary fog, such as the Void Aura's fog, would have been useless. Hence, he decided to use Hidden Moon. Hidden Moon was an ability of Nser's Embrace, which he had copied from the Emperor of Luingard. It allowed him to mask his presence in a fog of heat. Another effect of the heat fog was that it messed with one's senses. The effect was minimized on beings that saw with their eyes. They would merely struggle to see through the hot smoke. But creatures that relied on heat or sound perception were usually affected more severely, as the intense heat emanated by the fog disrupted everything to mask Northern's presence. All of the mournful bugs suddenly lost their coordination. Northern moved through the dark fog like a wraith, the illusion sword floating ghost-like in his hands. His movements were simple and efficient, swift and precise as he dismembered the wings from their backs. As he did so, without further injury to the abominations, their bodies fell and splattered on the ground like paste. A white trail of light from the sword flowed in sharp angles as he flew from place to place. Then the speed suddenly increased, the white light traveling terribly fast, drawing a pattern in the fog. As it stopped, all the mournful bugs began to rain down on Byran. You have slain Hazardous Hellion, Mourning Bug. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain Hazardous Hellion, Mourning Bug. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain Hazardous Hellion, Mourning Bug. You have gained +4 talent fragments. Northern read the series of runes with a cold light in his eyes, one side of his face smeared with purple blood. Swiftly, thanks to the fog, he had dispatched all the mournful bugs. He was tempted to say it had been strangely easy, but Northern knew that if he hadn't identified the wings as the real monster housing the soul, he would have continued futilely slashing at their bodies. Hence, this wasn't a generally easy task. It was only easy because he was the one doing it. What Byran had said suddenly seemed to be settling in. I'm not that strong. Even he couldn't help but feel like he was lying immediately after the thought crossed his mind. Really? I know I am. Northern suddenly paused, frowning. A second later, a much thicker and more intense buzz entered his ears. Following it, some truly crude insectoid monstrosities revealed themselves from the dark depths of the cave. They flew toward him, their hulking figures wrapped in layers of dark chitinous armor that glinted faintly in the sparse light. Their massive wings, veined and orange, spread wide like the sails of a warship, stirring the air with a thick, ominous hum. Razor-sharp claws clicked as their segmented tails coiled behind them, each ending in a wicked, barbed tip. Twin eyes, cold and expressionless, scanned their surroundings with an alien intelligence. Their eyes finally found the source of attraction. As one spotted him, all of them immediately turned their heads toward him. So those ones were the mobs. Northern sighed and dismissed his sword. Looks like I'll have to put aside getting used to the sword for a while and seriously deal with you guys. He muttered as he readied his hands, lowering them. Orange flames ignited like flaming spheres in his palms. Northern slowly raised his hand to his face, extending 2 fingers to make a sign before his eyes. Son of Flame. The cavern expanse was suddenly illuminated by a frightening explosion of white, such that one would think the very heart of the earth had been split open, spilling forth a searing light that chased away every shadow and left only stark, blinding brilliance. Chapter 702. Son of Flame. As the whiteness slowly dimmed, an orange-hued orb floated right behind Northern like a miniature sun, radiating warmth and power. Its surface flickered with restless energy, as though barely contained. The Son of Flame hovered ominously behind Northern, its radiant heat warping the very air around him. The hulking insectoids faltered for a brief moment, their instinctual drive to attack now challenged by the overwhelming force before them. Northern's eyes gleamed with a cold, focused intensity, his hand still having his face. He clenched his fingers into a fist, and the miniature sun responded by compressing itself into a denser, more volatile form. Threads of orange flame spiraled outward from the sun like solar flares, crackling and snapping with feral energy. Northern watched as the creatures hesitated rather than recklessly charging in. Their segmented tails twitched in anticipation, and their wings flared out to steady themselves mid-air. Their hesitation alone proved that they were at least smarter than the last ones. Those previous creatures were senseless mobs created only for the purpose of killing, perhaps eating. But hesitation wouldn't save these ones. No matter how intelligent they were, their inevitable demise would arrive all the same. Without warning, Northern thrust his hand forward. The Son of Flame obeyed, shooting out a concentrated thread of searing light that flexibly ripped through the air with a deafening roar. The closest insectoid barely had time to react before the thread pierced straight through its armored chest, obliterating its core. You have slain Hazardous Maelstrom, Ember Wasp. You have gained +5 talent fragments. The remaining monstrosities shrieked in unison, their cries echoing off the cavern walls. Whether it was rage or fear, Northern couldn't tell, nor did he care. He raised his hand again, and the sun expanded once more, its heat intensifying until the entire atmosphere was illuminated by a sinister, searing red glow. I would like to end this quickly, since I have a festival to attend, said the guy who claimed not to be that strong. The creatures finally broke their hesitation and charged en masse, their wings beating so furiously that the air itself seemed to tremble. Razor-sharp claws gleamed under the flickering light of the flames, and their barbed tails lashed forward, aiming to impale Northern from all directions. Northern remained still, calm amidst the chaos, his forte. With a sharp twist of his wrist, the Son of Flame shattered into countless shards of molten energy, each fragment finding its target with ruthless precision. The air was filled with the sound of sizzling chitin and shrill, dying wails as the shards burned through the insectoid's armor and pierced their cores. One by one, they fell, their massive forms crashing to the ground in lifeless heaps. The once deafening buzz of their wings faded into silence, replaced only by the crackling of flames and the faint hum of residual heat. Northern exhaled slowly as the fragments of the sun coalesced behind his head to become whole again. The tension in his body eased as he surveyed the aftermath. The cavern was now littered with the charred remains of the insectoid monstrosities, their bodies twisted and broken, their once imposing forms reduced to smoldering husks. You have slain hazardous maelstrom, ember wasp. You have gained +6 talent fragments. You have slain hazardous maelstrom, ember wasp. You have gained +6 talent fragments. The runes continued to flash before his eyes, but Northern paid them little attention. His mind was already moving forward, anticipating what lay ahead. He glanced toward the dark depths of the cave, where the faint echo of something far more sinister awaited. Then he floated toward it, guided by his enormous dark wings and the floating sun. He looked almost like an angel of both light and darkness, suspended between the two forces. Byron stared from below, watching his master proceed deeper into the depths of the dungeon with an unreadable expression. Then he blinked and looked down at his humming sword. You also can feel it. The master is so strong. I wonder if there is still more room for growth for me. Northern got to a narrow depth of the cave. His sun illuminated the surrounding darkness as he flew forward, almost causing it to burn away from him. But at this narrow depth, the darkness seemed especially resolute, clinging obstinately to the air around despite the terrifying radiance of the sun. Northern examined the surrounding darkness. He was literally carrying a burning sun at his back, and yet it refused to make way. That must be one hell of a primal darkness. The void? No, couldn't be. Although Northern had not absorbed all of the void at that strange rift that he fell through while fighting with Kahl, he had absorbed a large amount of it, enough to recognize the void even before getting close to it. So it was definitely not the void, he was sure. But the darkness was strong, strong enough to resist the intense radiance of his miniature sun. Let's see. Northern's chaos eyes opened, and immediately, as they fell on the darkness beyond, his eyes widened. A dark frown fell on his face. Crimson eyes stared directly at him with so much perverted glow that he almost felt naked. What the hell? The crimson eyes were very familiar. The glare was familiar. He had seen it before, and it did not take long for him to remember. The sea! There was something in the thick wall of darkness that seemed to draw its origin from the sea of crimson clouds that pooled around the academy. Northern narrowed his eyes. Something suddenly did not feel good. All his senses screamed for him to escape this instant. But that was his danger sense just making a hassle. He was more than enough to take care of whatever this eerie creature was. He readied himself, extending a finger, his hands eager to command the halo of sun resting behind his back. As if responding to his readiness, a terrifying screech tore through the darkness. A sound so sharp and piercing that Northern clutched his head in agony, blood trickling from his ears as the unbearable pressure shattered his senses. Chapter 703. The Darkness Enigma, Part 1. The screech didn't stop. It intensified, a relentless wave of sound so fierce it felt like shards of glass ripping through his mind. His vision blurred for a moment, and his void wings faltered, sending him spiraling downward before he stabilized and caught himself mid-air. Gritting his teeth, Northern forced himself upright, the pressure bearing down on him like the weight of a collapsing world. What is this thing? The crimson eyes gleamed from within the impenetrable darkness, glowing brighter as the entity stepped forward. Slowly, it emerged from the void-like gloom, revealing a twisted, nightmarish form. It was unlike any monster Northern had encountered before. The creature was humanoid, yet grotesque in its construction. Its limbs were elongated and spindly, ending in jagged claws that dripped with a thick, black substance. Crimson veins pulsed across its ashen skin, glowing faintly in sync with its eyes. Where its mouth should have been was a jagged slit, stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that gleamed ominously in the dim light of Northern sun. The darkness clung to its form like a living shroud, writhing and pulsing as if feeding off its presence. Northern wiped the blood from his ears, his chaos eyes narrowing as he analyzed the creature. Its aura was unlike anything he had faced, dense, suffocating, and ancient, as though it had existed long before the world he knew had taken shape. It's not just primal darkness. It's alive. The realization sent a shiver through him, but he didn't allow fear to cloud his thoughts. He straightened, his hand moving to command the sun of flame. With a swift gesture, the miniature sun flared to life, its surface erupting in tendrils of searing flame. The cavern brightened once more as Northern unleashed torrents of fire, several brilliant streams of molten energy that hurtled toward the creature. The flames reached the entity in a heartbeat, engulfing it in a swirling inferno. The air rippled with heat, the very stone beneath the creature's feet glowing from the intensity of the attack. For a moment, it seemed as though Northern's assault had succeeded. But then, from within the blaze, a dark silhouette emerged. The creature stepped through the flames unscathed, the darkness around it absorbing the fire as though it were feeding on its energy. The glow of its crimson eyes intensified, and a low, guttural growl escaped its twisted maw. It devoured the flames? Northern barely had time to react before the creature lunged at him, moving faster than anything its size should have been capable of. He flapped his void wings, propelling himself backward just in time to avoid the swipe of its claws. A sharp gust of wind followed in the wake of its attack, the force enough to crack the stone walls around them. Northern landed several meters away, his mind racing. The flames were useless, and the creature's speed was formidable. He needed a new approach, something it couldn't consume or evade. If fire won't work, Northern spread his hand over the air, and thin, gray flakes began to drift out of his body, like ash falling from a dying fire. The sunlight behind him dimmed unnaturally, the warmth in the air swiftly replaced by an eerie chill. A freezing aura enveloped the sky, and the once blazing sun trembled as if gripped by unseen hands. Slowly, its brilliant flames dulled and crystallized, turning into a fractured sphere of frozen light, dark veins creeping outward across its surface like cracks in fragile glass. The world below shivered beneath the shadow of something far more terrifying than darkness. A frozen sun. I didn't think it would work. His lips curled into a satisfied smile. I love DIY. Because DIY existed, there was no barrier between his talent abilities. Northern could blend any of them, exchanging one principle for another. The only limit was his intelligence. Northern raised both hands, his void wings unfurling with a subtle, ominous grace. Thin patches of frost spread across their wide, shadowy length, shimmering faintly in the dim light. Each movement of the wings stirred the cold air, leaving a trail of frost particles suspended in the space around him. The very atmosphere seemed to bend to his presence, as if the void itself hungered to consume the lingering warmth. The ice spears gleamed with an unnatural, darkish hue, jagged and serrated, as though forged from the coldest depths of darkness. They hovered around the frozen sun, their razor-sharp tips aimed directly at the dark entity that loomed below Northern. The creature growled lowly, its crimson eyes narrowing as it sensed the shift in power. The frozen sun exuded an aura far more malevolent than the flames, chilling not just the air, but even the walls of the cave. Northern's fingers twitched slightly, and in response, the ice spears shot forward with blistering speed, whistling through the air like frozen bolts of death. Each spear left a thin trail of frost in its wake, the cavern walls groaning under the sudden drop in temperature. The first spear pierced through the creature's shoulder with a sickening crunch, forcing it to stagger back. A surge of frost exploded outward, encasing part of its torso in jagged ice. The creature screeched, its voice a discordant mix of fury and pain. Northern's eyes glinted with cold satisfaction. The frozen sun continued to churn behind him, spears forming and launching in rapid succession. Each strike drove the creature back, its dark shroud flickering and weakening under the relentless assault. Northern grinned widely, enjoying the sadistic beauty in bombarding the entity. With a wave of his hand, he directed the frozen sun to descend. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though the weight of its presence threatened to crush everything beneath it. The very ground trembled, frost spreading in intricate, fractal patterns across the stone floor. Despite being impaled by several ice spears, The creature lunged once more, desperate to break free from the barrage, but Northern had already anticipated the move. He flapped his frost-tipped void wings, propelling himself upward while conjuring a dense barrier of frozen air between himself and the creature. Shatter! The single word carried the force of command, and in response, the frozen barrier splintered outward in a devastating hailstorm of jagged shards. Each shard sliced through the creature's defenses, embedding deep into its form and spreading frost across its limbs. The creature staggered, its movements growing sluggish as ice encased its joints. For the first time since the battle began, it looked vulnerable, or so. Chapter 704. The Darkness Enigma, Part 2. Northern didn't hesitate. He extended both hands, summoning the full force of the frozen sun. It pulsed ominously, the cracks along its surface glowing with a pale, icy light. The frozen sun imploded in an instant, collapsing inward before exploding outward in a colossal blast of frost and void essence. The force of the detonation shook the entire cavern, a blinding wave of freezing light engulfing everything in its path. When the light faded, silence reigned. Northern hovered in mid-air, his breath visible in the cold air as he surveyed the aftermath. The cavern was now encased in frost, jagged icicles hanging from the ceiling, and the ground below was coated in a thick layer of shimmering ice. At the center of the destruction lay the creature, its once terrifying form now frozen solid, trapped in an eternal scream. The crimson glow of its eyes had dimmed, leaving behind only lifeless orbs encased in frost. The frozen sun had dissipated, leaving only faint trails of frost lingering in the air. Northern landed softly on the icy ground, his void wings folding behind him and vanishing as he approached the frozen corpse. It's over. Yet, as he drew closer, a faint pulse of dark energy emanated from within the frozen form. Northern paused, his splintered eyes narrowing as he detected something. Something still alive, buried deep within the creature's core. Before he could react, the ice began to crack. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cavern once more, and Northern's expression hardened. "Oh hell, don't tell me." The frozen corpse shattered, sending shards of ice flying in all directions. From within the broken remains, a new form emerged. A smaller, more concentrated version of the creature, its body now sleek and compact, with veins of crimson energy pulsing violently beneath its skin. This time, there were no signs of hesitation. The creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, faster than before, its claws glowing with an ominous red hue. Northern, of course, was unfazed, confident in the defense that the void force gave him. They clashed, the force of the impact sending him skidding backward across the icy ground. The invisible shield held. However, Northern's eyes slowly widened. Cracks spidered across its surface. Besides the fact that the creature had somehow evolved, its strike had a terrifying effect on the limitless void's shield, an impeccable form of defense Northern had thought to be impenetrable. His mind raced as he steadied himself. This cannot be an ordinary monster. It had suddenly become faster, stronger, and the void ice seemed to have no effect on it anymore, just like the flames from before did not. Perhaps it was the kind of monster that adapted to every attack, growing stronger with every encounter. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips despite the situation. "All right," he muttered, his voice low but resolute. "Let's see how far you can stand against me." He would take this as a serious preliminary lesson to prepare him for the festival. Northern anticipated he would be fighting all kinds of talents and drifters, some cunning, some brutally strong. He didn't expect it to be easy, most especially since he was more used to fighting monsters than fighting drifters. Northern summoned the illusion sword, the molten veins weaving its dark and elegant self around his body. The spirit linen glowed and formed a white cloak with high collar around the armor, fluttering like the cape of a hero in the soft wind. A white essence flowed into the sword as Northern's splintered gaze narrowed, and he blasted forward. The creature matched his speed, vanishing in the same moment. A lusterless black steel had elongated from its hand. Both of them met with a terrifying clash, the walls around them shattering with cracks, echoes resounding deeper into the expanse. Northern's eyes widened. It even matched my strength? He pulled his sword back immediately and swung again, carving a delicate arc through the air. The monster parried with both hands, although the shock reverberated through its body. Immediately it grew another blade on the other hand and lunged towards Northern. Very much aware of his surroundings without needing to look, Northern kicked the sword away and immediately thrust his knee into the creature's chest. Air exploded out of its back. But it did not give in, did not move an inch. Instead, it brought the second sword again, locking in on the illusion blade and forcing Northern back. Northern resisted and pushed forward instead but was met with an even more ferocious resistance. The creature gnashed its maw stubbornly and refused to move. Both of them for a moment were locked in a tugging of some sort without a yielding side. Northern suddenly grinned. "You'd be foolish to think all I can do is with one hand." Northern extended his hand, creating a ball of chaos essence that stretched to form an arrow. The creature glanced at his other hand. However, Northern grinned in that moment. The glance was all that Northern needed. If it was an adaptive creature as it seemed, he did not want it adapting to chaos, so of course, he was not going to be stupid enough to use his chaos essence like that, more so on such a small scale. He shoved the monster's sword to the side, sliding it downwards and with a jerk to the front. He dove on and smashed the enigma with his forehead, throwing its dark and grotesque head backward. The creature faltered for a moment, its balance broken. Northern wasted no time, taking advantage of the chaotic moment. He dove in further with an unnatural bend, twisting his sword low and severing both the creature's legs with a clean cut. Crimson gore sprayed across, his white cloak flying in front of him to stop the blood from smearing his face. The linen flared dramatically as Northern swung it back. He shot towards the fallen creature, all four eyes glowing with a cold light as he raised the illusion sword above the chest of the creature, the chaos essence swirling its blade glowing even brighter. Northern brought the sword down with cold indifference, driving it deep into the chest of the monster with a satisfying crunch soothing his healing ears. He made sure his sword struck the core he had seen before stepping back from the monster. "You have slain Catastrophic Maelstrom Dark Enigma. You have gained plus 10 talent fragments." Letting out a huge sigh, Northern reflected. The fight was short but tough. The bastard would have continued evolving if he hadn't employed his senses. "I can't imagine facing another of those. It should be the floor boss," he muttered. He suddenly froze, a foreboding feeling seeping underneath his skin. "Why do I feel like I just said something very wrong?" Before Northern could journey any further in his thoughts, several glowing red eyes came alive in the depth of the darkness. They began to move closer, coming out of the depth. More of them, in their initial form, revealed themselves. And Northern's mouth fell. "Crap! I jinxed it." He jinxed it. Chapter 705. The Right Attitude to Growth. Northern exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on the illusion sword. His eyes swept over the approaching forms, each one bearing the same grotesque features as the creature he had just slain. Elongated limbs, jagged claws, and crimson veins pulsing with ominous energy. There were at least a dozen of them, their crimson eyes gleaming hungrily in the dim, frost-covered cavern. The air grew heavier with each step they took, the oppressive aura of primal darkness returning, more potent than before. "I really did jinx it." A small frown slowly settled upon his face. Of course, Northern was not scared of fighting the monsters. He had more than enough resources to dispose of all of them without having to lift a finger. But that was the thing. That right there was the problem. He had more than enough summons now to destroy all of them. But would it be right doing so? Was it okay to depend on those summons for battle? Where then was his own room for growth? For example, there was an experience he would gain from fighting these monsters that he probably wouldn't gain elsewhere. Was it okay to lose that experience? With all the questions slowly mounting upon his mind, Northern paused for a moment. What the hell? In that moment, he realized a terrifying truth. While many people right now would be seeking a path to survival, would be trying to escape, He was busy wondering if asking his summons to fight was the right thing to do. He understood that it was only because he was stupendously strong that he could give room to thoughts like this. Logically, there was nothing wrong with relying on his summons. They were extensions of his power, manifestations of his will, and in many cases, stronger than most adversaries he'd face. That was the practical answer, the one any strategist would agree with. Why risk unnecessary injury or waste time when he could summon strong void entities to crush his enemies effortlessly? But deep down, Northern felt a pang of dissatisfaction gnawing at him. Was he becoming complacent? Growth wasn't just about victory. It was about struggle, facing challenges head-on and emerging stronger, sharper, more capable. Still, he couldn't entirely dismiss the other side of the argument. The risks were real. In a world like Trael, plagued by rifts and monsters, survival wasn't guaranteed, even for someone like him. Especially for someone like him. He knew that a single mistake, a moment of underestimating his opponent, could lead to disaster. Would pride in personal strength be worth the cost if it meant losing his life or someone else's? Think clearly, Northern, he told himself, calming the storm of conflicting thoughts. There's a balance to be found here. Relying on my summons when necessary doesn't mean I'm weak. But avoiding challenges entirely because I can take an easier path, that's dangerous. It wasn't about refusing help or clinging to a stubborn ideal of personal strength. It was about ensuring that he didn't stagnate. His summons were a part of him, yes, but they weren't all of him. The world demanded evolution, and that included both his mind and his body. With this in mind, Northern made a decision. He would fight these creatures on his own, not because he needed to prove something, but because he needed the experience. He could learn more from this battle, the instincts, the reactions, the feel of combat, and the extent to which he was forced to think out a solution. All of it contributed to his growth, and if he ever wanted to truly master himself, he couldn't afford to lose these moments. A low growl echoed from the nearest creature, snapping Northern back to the present. The horde of grotesque figures advanced steadily, their jagged claws scraping against the icy floor, creating a sound akin to glass being shattered repeatedly. Focus, Northern muttered under his breath, steadying his stance. He loosened his grip on the illusion sword slightly, feeling the subtle hum of its energy ripple through his palm as he filled it with chaos essence once more. As the first creature lunged forward, Northern sidestepped with precision, his body moving in a blur. He slashed upward, the illusion sword carving through the air in a seamless arc. The blade shimmered, leaving a faint, almost white afterimage-like trail, and before the creature could react, it was split cleanly in two. Crimson ichor sprayed across the ground, sizzling as it met the frozen surface. Before he could take a breath, two more creatures flanked him, their claws poised to strike. Northern's mind whirred, instincts taking over as he bent low, narrowly dodging the swipes aimed at his head. He thrust his sword backward without looking, impaling one creature through its chest. With a twist of his wrist, he pulled the blade free and spun to meet the second attacker, delivering a swift, decisive slash across its neck. The remaining monsters hesitated, momentarily unnerved by Northern's efficiency. Despite their mindless hunger, something primal told them that this human was extremely dangerous. Northern straightened, his breath forming misty clouds in the chilled air. His eyes scanned the creatures warily. For one, he knew that his effort might turn out to be useless, that they just might evolve with the attack. After all, they were in their initial form, just like the first form the last one had appeared in. But for all of it, he had a perfect plan that would not waste his time. Thinking about dealing with them like this, enjoying every moment he swung his sword or just ending it, he hesitated for a bit. Inasmuch as he could have chosen to use an ability that would end this quickly, he had an arsenal of adaptable abilities he could use. He really just wanted to enjoy it. The horde sensed his hesitation and charged in unison, their jagged limbs tearing through the air like razors. Northern inhaled deeply, centering himself. Time seemed to slow as he tapped into the muscle memory from countless battles. His surroundings sharpened, the sound of claws against ice, the faint crackle of energy in the air. the steady beat of his heart. With a burst of speed, he surged forward, meeting the horde head-on. The blade of the illusion sword slowly faded from reality but still sliced through flesh and bone with surgical precision. Each strike was delivered with purpose, each movement calculated to conserve energy while maximizing damage. Despite the chaos of the battle, Northern's thoughts remained clear. He analyzed every step, every slash, mentally noting areas where he could improve. There was no wasted movement, no unnecessary flourish, only the raw, distilled essence of combat. Minutes later, the cavern fell silent, save for the faint drip of ichor pooling on the icy floor. Northern stood amidst the carnage, his breathing steady, the illusion sword gleaming faintly in the dim light. Its blade returned. Then all the fallen bodies began to explode one after the other. Northern gripped the sword and readied himself for the real battle. Chapter 706. The Darkness Enigma, Part 3. The cavern pulsed with a sinister energy, thick waves of dark essence radiating from the exploding bodies. The ground trembled as if recoiling from the sheer malevolence being released. Northern watched intently, his splintered gaze narrowing as he sensed something familiar, something ominous. Here we go again. From the ruptured remains of the creatures, pools of black ichor began to gather and converge at the center of the cavern. The ichor writhed and twisted, forming grotesque shapes that flickered between solid and fluid, as if caught between two states of existence. Northern's grip tightened on the illusion sword, his eyes slowly examining the figures as they solidified their forms and turned to focus on him. BRZZT. The atmosphere around Northern suddenly became charged, the gentle drifting of the chilly air around him becoming slower than usual. No perfect time to use this than now. Northern casually moved a step. From his feet to the ground, charged lightning sparks flew around, connecting and dancing between his leg and the ground. As he moved the other leg, the same thing happened. The atmosphere became frozen. All the coming abominations paused between their movements. Northern was the only one freely moving. The speedwalk ability that his body had absorbed and broken down to use as a resource for an unlimited amount of potential speed, of course, was not totally lost. Northern had figured during his generous use of his speed at the time he was trapped in the illusion that he had not completely lost all the talent abilities of the talent. In fact, they all were resident in him. They just took another route to manifestation, a route more coherent to his body. And after using so much speed consistently, he had eventually figured it out a long time ago. Of course, the ability ate at his stamina like a starved beast. But it was the easiest and quickest way to end this fight. Then he could go ahead to rest. That is, if there is no other monster again. Northern raised his sword and calmly walked towards the frozen abominations. He took his time to slash each and every single one of them, the slash of his sword freezing along with the flow of time. Darkness spread beneath his legs, following him slowly as he walked from one enigma to the other. When he was done with the last, the area where all the monsters stood was pooled by an almost liquid darkness. Northern dismissed his sword and joined his hands together, muttering, "Black Lance." From the pools of darkness, as time rippled and resumed its relentless flow, sinister black lances erupted forth, their jagged forms crudely tearing through the abomination's twisted flesh. The air crackled with the oppressive weight of darkness, each lance dripping with fragments of shadow as it struck with unerring precision. The abominations shrieked in discordant agony, their corrupted forms quivering beneath the merciless onslaught. You have slain Catastrophic Maelstrom, Dark Enigma. You have gained plus 10 talent fragments. You have slain Catastrophic Maelstrom, Dark Enigma. You have gained plus 10 talent fragments. You have slain Catastrophic Maelstrom, Dark Enigma. You have gained plus 10 talent fragments. A satisfied glow dimmed in Northern's eyes as he watched all of them succumb to the unavoidable cut of the Black Lance. All of them except one. At that moment, Northern's eyes suddenly widened, followed by a very dark frown. It seemed, by chance, the Black Lance's precise and unavoidable cut had missed the cores of one of the enigmas. That is bad. And the creature was immediately already adapting. Adapting to Black Lance is insane. Damn. I messed up. From the ruptured remains of the creatures, pools of black ichor began to gather and flow towards the single surviving enigma. It's even absorbing the rest? Northern attempted to move, but before he could, the swirling mass of ichor solidified into a towering figure, twice the height of the previous creatures. Its form was vaguely humanoid but grotesquely exaggerated, massive, jagged limbs ending in claws that seemed to shimmer with a crimson sheen. Dark armor-like plating covered its body, and from its back sprouted 6 elongated appendages, each tipped with a razor-sharp blade. Most unnerving of all were its eyes, 6 gleaming orbs of deep crimson, arranged in a circular pattern on its head. They glared at Northern with an intensity that suggested intelligence, hunger, and something far worse, awareness. The creature let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating through the cavern and causing icicles to fall from the ceiling. Northern raised the illusion sword, his expression cold and resolute. "All right, big guy, let's dance. It's not like I have any other choice," he muttered with a pout. Without hesitation, the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, its 6 appendages slicing through the air in perfect synchronization. Northern dodged the first strike with a burst of void essence, flickering to the side just as the second appendage came crashing down where he had stood moments before. The impact shattered the frozen ground, sending shards of ice flying in every direction. Northern didn't let the creature recover. He surged forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. With a swift motion, he slashed at its torso, the soft glow of chaos essence, coating the illusion sword glowing brighter as it cut through the dark plating. But instead of ichor spilling out, the creature's body absorbed the energy from the strike, its armor glowing faintly in response. Northern flew back with widened eyes. "Come on now," is feeding off essence. Northern's eyes flickered with irritation. "Fine. Have it your way. Don't blame me if you get a stomach ache." He flared his void wings, propelling himself backward to gain distance. As he hovered in midair, he extended his free hand, summoning tendrils of pure void essence that spiraled outward in intricate patterns. The creature, sensing the surge of power, roared again and charged, its appendages slicing through the tendrils as it advanced. But Northern had already anticipated its move. With a sharp motion, he commanded the tendrils to coil around the creature's limbs, anchoring it in place. The creature thrashed violently, but the void tendrils held firm, tightening with every movement. "Let's see how well you handle this." Northern raised the illusion sword. However, before his eyes, the monster suddenly began to grow even larger. A horrified expression broke out on his face. "Really?" Chapter 707. The Adapting Darkness. Northern gritted his teeth as he watched the abomination grow before him. The creature's body swelled grotesquely, its armor thickening, appendages elongating, and those crimson eyes burning with even greater malice. The void tendrils strained, creaking under the immense pressure of the expanding form. The greedy bastard had just explosively adapted to the little amount of chaos essence it had absorbed from the sword. That made Northern question whether it was really okay to let it keep absorbing his essence. He released the tendrils immediately, knowing that maintaining them any longer would only worsen the situation. He really did not want the monster adapting to the void. That would be very bad. It had adapted to Black Lance already. Although Northern was thankful that Black Lance was a derivative of Chaos Flame, which essentially belonged to the chaos flow in his body. Void was another story, plus the already foreboding feeling that he had about the strange darkness that surrounded the enigma. Right now, his instincts were telling him that the creature absorbing void essence was going to be a very detrimental mistake that would be costly. Maybe not now, but eventually. Northern's line of thought was cut short as the creature roared, its powerful guttural voice threatening to shatter the fabric of reality. Its massive form towered over him like a shadow of impending doom. Unfazed by the difference in height and the terror that the creature posed, Northern glared back into its eyes. In fact, for some reason, the creature seemed to recognize the defiance and resolve in Northern's glare, causing its eyes to become more menacing, glowing and dimming with a vicious crimson light threatening to devour rapidly. Then the bastard moved. With a sudden lurch, it lunged forward, its 6 appendages slicing through the air like massive blades. Northern easily, using the illusioned Hefter's order ability, blinked out of the monster's space and appeared far off. But the creature was fast. Its reflexes were fast. Despite its grotesque bulk, it moved with terrifying speed, closing the gap between them in seconds and lashing those snake-like appendages towards Northern again. Northern dodged, twisting mid-air as the first appendage narrowly missed him. The second came immediately after, forcing him to parry with the illusion sword. Sparks flew as the blade met the appendage, the force of the impact sending a jolt through Northern's arm. It's stronger, and it was learning. He gritted his teeth, spawning out his wings and flaring them to propel himself. The creature roared in frustration, its eyes gleaming with hunger as it tracked his every move. Dark tendrils began to writhe around its form, pulsing in sync with the crimson veins crisscrossing its grotesque body. Northern narrowed his eyes, focusing specifically on those tendrils that writhed around it. He could tell. He could feel it. The energy emanating from the creature was shifting, becoming more chaotic, somewhat familiar. Chaos? But the bastard was doing what Northern was doing with void tendrils with the chaos it had absorbed. The cold realization gripped him. The bastard wasn't just adapting to his essence. It was attempting to recreate it, to become something more than just an abomination. Should it succeed, that would give way to the birth of a very terrifying creature. Northern was not sure if any existence aside from him wielded chaos, and he was too envious to let another. This bastard dies right here, right now. Of course, his resolution had always been to kill it either way. But Northern did not think he had anticipated and wanted to kill a monster so much as he wanted to kill this evolved dark enigma. Northern released the illusion blade from his hands, leaving it to scatter in shards of black light. Then his fingers spread out. As they did, azure ethereal threads flowed out of his hands, flailing like a restless wind, each strand gleaming faintly against the darkened air. The air around Northern shimmered faintly as the azure threads danced in fluid, erratic patterns, their soft glow casting an eerie light across the cavern. Each thread moved with a will of its own, responding to the slightest twitch of his fingers, bending, twisting, and weaving like strands of fate. The creature roared again, sensing the shift in power, its tendrils pulsing violently in response. Without hesitation, it lunged forward, its 6 appendages slicing through the space in perfect synchronization. Northern did not flinch. With a flick of his wrist, the ethereal threads shot forward, slicing through the air with a whispering hiss. They moved faster than the creature's appendages, weaving through the gaps between the dark blades like serpents, wrapping around them in a tight, shifting grip. The creature's momentum faltered as the threads constricted, tightening like a noose around its limbs. It thrashed violently, trying to break free, but the threads clung to it stubbornly, pulsing with a faint azure light. Northern's eyes gleamed coldly. He raised his hand higher, and the threads obeyed, lifting the creature off the ground. The tendrils writhed furiously, but every movement only caused the threads to dig deeper, severing the flow of chaotic energy within them. Not so fast. The creature shrieked, releasing a wave of chaotic force that distorted the air around it. The impact caused the threads to quiver, but Northern didn't let go. Instead, he spread his fingers wider, and the threads multiplied, forming a dense web that surrounded the abomination entirely. With a fluid motion, Northern flicked his fingers, sending several strands darting toward the creature's exposed joints. They moved like needles, precise and deadly, piercing through the gaps in its armor with terrifying accuracy. Crimson ichor sprayed from the wounds, sizzling as it hit the frozen ground. The creature retaliated, swinging one of its appendages in a wild arc. Northern pulled back slightly, the threads responding instantly by retracting, avoiding the strike by a hair's breadth. Then, with a subtle twist of his fingers, he redirected the threads in a spiraling motion, looping around the creature's neck and torso. The azure strands shimmered brightly as they tightened, slicing through its armor with a soft, metallic screech. Northern's movements were graceful, almost serene, as he guided the threads with practiced ease. To an observer, it would have seemed like a dance, each flick of his fingers, each subtle motion of his wrists, orchestrating a symphony of light and shadow that encased the battlefield. The creature shrieked again, this time in pain, as more threads pierced its core, disrupting its chaotic flow. Its tendrils flailed desperately, but they could not touch Northern. He was always a step ahead, weaving through the gaps with ethereal precision, his threads slicing through the air like whispers of death. But Northern knew better than to grow complacent. The creature's body began to shift once more, its veins pulsing erratically as it tried to adapt to the threads. Crimson light flared within its core, threatening to destabilize the web that bound it. "Nah, I'm not going to allow you to do that." Without hesitation, Northern brought his hands together, the threads converging into a single, concentrated point above the creature. They twisted and spun, forming a spear-like shape that pulsed with raw energy. With a final motion, he thrust the concentrated spear downward. The threads shot forward in a brilliant streak of light, piercing the creature's core with unerring precision. The impact was immediate. Crimson light exploded outward, but the threads didn't falter. They tightened around the core, sealing it in a cocoon of azure light. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The creature's thrashing ceased, its form quivering violently as the threads drained the chaotic energy from its core. The light dimmed, and with a final, shuddering gasp, the creature collapsed, its body disintegrating into fragments of dark essence. "You have slain a devilish dark enigma. You have gained plus 15 talent fragments." Northern rolled his shoulders, easing the soreness. "Crap. I've been here for a while. I need to leave and rest for the beginning of the festival." Northern sighed and was about to turn when he suddenly paused and frowned. He turned back slowly and narrowed his eyes with a suspicious frown. The darkness seemed to still linger, now even more than before. It was shifting as if moving along the same circumference. Northern slowly extended his hands, getting ready to unleash a lot on whatever it was. He just pitted his stamina. Byron's voice echoed from the limitless void. "Master, I think this is the floor boss." "Shut up, I know." Northern had forgotten for a moment that he had to face the floor boss. The immense strength of the monster had led him to easily forget. If the floor monsters were that difficult to deal with, how strong will the floor boss be? Just as he thought about it, the ground suddenly began to shake, albeit slightly. The array of crimson eyes opened again in the darkness, but this time, they seemed to draw nearer and got clearer as the darkness itself seemed to take a definite shape. As Northern saw the creature coming out, his eyes went up and his face paled out completely.
Ash Oli Krap.
Chapter 708. The Dark Seer, Part 1. Northern carefully scanned the darkness as it began to shift and form into something. A small frown creased his face, turning graver by the second. His hands clenched tight, greasy with sweat. His eyes burned with a dangerous light threatening to show no mercy despite his cautiousness. The being slowly formed out of the darkness, towering like a monument to war. Its body was a grotesque canvas of limbs, dozens of muscular arms sprouting from its sides, each twitching with the tension of untapped strength. Crimson eyes littered its skin, blinking, each one reflecting a different shade of madness, as though they witnessed realms beyond comprehension. A jagged crown sat atop its weathered head, blackened as if forged in the depths of an ancient inferno of darkness. Its beard, long and silver, swayed like strands of mist in a forgotten forest. Draped in a skirt of iron scales that clinked with every movement, it took deliberate, thunderous steps forward. The ground quivered beneath its weight. In its primary hand, the creature wielded a massive odachi, its blade dull and scarred, yet radiating an aura of ruinous potential. Despite the bedlam etched into its form, there was a strange elegance in its movements, a being both grotesque and majestic, like a god of misery stepping forth into the mortal realm. Silence lingered in its wake, broken only by the faint rustle of shifting arms and the ever-watchful gaze of its myriad eyes. Without delay, Northern's eyes glowed, and an array of flaming and frozen spears speedily burst out of the air and spread around. In an instant, the entire place was ablaze with lances of destruction. The flaming and frozen spears tore through the air, their streaking brilliance casting wild shadows across the stone ground. Northern's breath came steady, measured, his eyes delicately tracing every possible movement of the towering monstrosity before him. The creature didn't flinch. Its myriad crimson eyes glinted like polished rubies as its arms twisted in a blur of motion. With a deafening clang, its odachi swung in an arc too swift for its size, cleaving through the oncoming spears like brittle glass. Flames splintered, frost scattered, but Northern was already moving. Shadow-stepping, he appeared behind the creature, twin spears of rigid blackness forming in his hands. He struck fast, the weapons hissing through the air with the precision of a predator's claws. Sparks erupted as the black lances met an iron-hard arm. The arm held, but the cave did not. Several cuts divided the hall and slithered across the wall. A sudden jolt of force hurled Northern back, his boots skidding across the ground as the creature turned to face him, all eyes locking onto his form. He had made a very terrifying decision to wield Black Lance as a weapon because the monster, at a glance, he could tell, needed a much more powerful opponent. He had the Void Force to protect himself from the cuts. Besides, Black Lance only delivers cleaves that can cut his opponent. Even if he did not have the Void Force of Limitless Void, he would still be unaffected. He had expected some kind of resistance or strange maneuver. The creature, after all, was indeed powerful. But no, Northern had not expected a complete block-off. He continued to stare at the creature with widened and trembling eyes. Monster profile. Name: the Dark Seer. True name: Spawn of Darkness. Rank: Destroyer. Danger level: Catastrophic. Attributes: Occult Eyes, Soul of Metal, Body of Metal, Blood of Syrinx. Abilities: Eyes of the Seer, Impenetrable Defense, Syrinx's Arms. Northern frowned. I've fought a destroyer before, and this has not happened. He was very correct, and it left him in utter confusion. How come the monsters in these dungeons are stronger than the ones that the world is seeing out there? What really is going on? Unfortunately, Northern had not the time to think on such a question. The Dark Seer was already on the move, darting towards him with unnatural grace. Northern created more ice and fire spears, this time even creating several black lances with them, and launched them towards the beast immediately as it took off. But the creature's limbs blurred, swatting aside the elemental lances like gnats. One arm shot forward, faster than Northern could anticipate, aiming to crush him into the stone floor. He dove, rolling just in time to avoid the crushing blow. The impact left a crater where he had stood, dust and debris filling the air. Emerging from the haze, Northern's eyes gleamed coldly. He extended his arm, and dozens of black lances materialized in the air around him. With a sharp flick of his wrist, they shot forward, each one honing in on the creature like guided missiles. This time, the creature stumbled. The lances pierced through its lesser arms, dark ichor spilling from the wounds. But it didn't roar. It didn't show pain. Instead, its jagged mouth twisted into a grin, a horrifying expression that sent a chill down Northern's spine. The creature retaliated in a whirlwind of violence. Multiple arms lashed out simultaneously, each strike capable of tearing through steel. Northern ducked and weaved, the world around him blurring as he shot across the cavern expanse with the creature on his tail. His heart thundered in his chest, muscles straining to keep up with the relentless assault. A misstep, one of the creature's arms grazed him, and Northern watched as the force reality of limitless void scattered for a brief moment like broken shards of glass in that slow moment, then rearranged back almost immediately. His eyes widened and legs staggered, blood trickling from a small wound on his cheek. A wound. When last had he gotten one of those? There was no time to think or recover. The odachi came swinging down in a vertical slash, aiming to split him in two. Damn! Northern growled through gritted teeth. His eyes flared brighter, distorting the air around him. Time slowed, just enough for him to twist out of the blade's path. The Odachi slammed into the ground with earth-shattering force, sending a shockwave rippling outward. Northern used the momentum, propelling himself upward. In mid-air, he gathered his energy, swirling chaos and void into a single point. His right hand burned with raw power, the force barely contained as he prepared his next strike. Chapter 709. The Dark Seer, Part 2. He thrust his hand forward, releasing a spiraling torrent of white and black essence that crackled and hissed like a living storm. The blast slammed into the creature's chest, forcing it back for the first time. Cracks spread across its iron-like skin, and the ichor flowed freely now, staining the ground beneath it. Northern landed, knees bent, breath heaving. His vision blurred for a moment, the strain of using chaos and void at the same time immediately beginning to take its toll. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The creature straightened, its form flickering in and out of clarity as if refusing to fully exist in this realm. Its many eyes burned brighter, madness incarnate. It raised its Odachi once more, preparing to charge. Northern grinned despite the pain coursing through his body. He could feel it, the rush of battle, the thrill of dancing on the edge of death. I missed this. He never thought he would hear himself say such a thing, but he really did. Perhaps there was a certain complacency he employed towards battle because he knew he could not get hurt anyway. Maybe that was why he had not been giving his whole. Despite having a generous repertoire of talent abilities, he chose to be stereotypical and boring, because nothing so far had been life-threatening to him. At the same time, his mind could not help but drift away in question. Did he really have to be in an immersed realization that death could reach him any time for him to enjoy battle? The creature blurred forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed, its Odachi cleaving through the air in a merciless arc. Northern didn't move, not at first. His eyes were busy tracking the details, reading the shifting cracks in space around the incoming strike. It was subtle and could easily be missed, but the creature terribly affected the space around it by its movement alone. And those eyes on its hands made it so hard for Northern to move faster than the creature could expect, or to surpass its perception. There was almost no way out of it. At the last possible moment, he shifted. Void essence flickered around his form like shadows as he twisted to the side. Northern watched again with widened eyes as the Odachi's edge grazed past him by mere inches, scattering the void force and sending a chill down his spine. He spun with the motion, his body fluid and precise, black flames surging to his palm as he retaliated with a strike aimed at the creature's exposed side. The blow connected, and the flames exploded upon impact, sending another crack rippling across the creature's body. But it didn't falter. Instead, several of its arms lashed out at once, aiming to crush him under sheer brute force. Northern leapt back, but one arm caught his ankle midair. He felt the bone twist painfully before he was flung across the battlefield like a ragdoll. He hit the ground hard, sliding several feet before coming to a stop. His breath caught in his throat, but he forced himself up, shaking off the pain. What was that just now? It had happened so fast that he could not keep up. The Dark Seer had somehow managed to touch him. It broke through the void force? Northern had not the time to celebrate his paling terror. The creature also was not going to give him any. It charged again, this time all of its arms moving in perfect synchronization, a whirlwind of deadly limbs and jagged steel. The Odachi came down once more, splitting the air with a high-pitched whistle. Northern didn't dodge. Instead, he raised both hands, white and black energy spiraling in each palm before colliding together in a violent pulse. Chaos and void. The collision created a shockwave of force that met the descending Odachi head-on. The ground shattered beneath their combined force, fragments of stone flying in every direction. Northern's legs buckled slightly under the strain, but he held his ground, forcing the creature's weapon back through sheer willpower. Essence crackled wildly between them, distorting the air, making it hard to tell where reality ended and chaos began. Before the creature could react, Northern's form blurred, splitting into 3 identical clones. Each clone shot around with blurring speed and quickly. They surrounded the creature in a triangle formation, weapons drawn and essence crackling at their fingertips. The first clone struck from the left, twin dagger blades aimed at the creature's knees. The second clone lunged from behind, Grenger in its hands, humming with an insidiously sinister glow. He hurled it toward the creature's back. Northern himself charged head-on, the soul threads forming in his grip like a coiled whip, ready to bind and tear. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very air. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, blocking the incoming attacks with frightening precision. 2 arms caught the stilettos, snapping them apart like brittle twigs, while another set of arms swatted the dual-bladed staff out of the clone's hand. Its odachi moved in a blur, aiming to cleave Northern in 2. But Northern was faster. He blurred out of the sword's path, his strings lashing out like serpents. They wrapped around one of the creature's many arms, searing into its iron-like skin. He pulled hard, forcing the creature off balance, giving his clones an opening. Stainless appeared in the hands of the second clone as it shot forward and struck again, this time aiming for the area where the creature's core sat. The blow landed, carving deep into its chest. The ichor gushed forth, sizzling. The creature stumbled, momentarily overwhelmed by the combined assault. Northern didn't hesitate. He gathered all the essence he could muster at the moment, white and black swirling around him in a vortex of raw power. His eyes burned brighter, chaos and void merging into a single volatile force. This would be it, the finishing blow. "Die!" he whispered, voice calm, steady. He thrust his hand forward, releasing the gathered essence in a blinding torrent. The blast tore through the air, a roaring wave of destruction that slammed into the creature with unrelenting force. The ground trembled, cracks spidering out from the impact as the energy consumed everything in its path. Chapter 710 Chaos and Void Part 1. Northern's shoulders rose and fell as his eyes pierced into the subtly clearing cloud of dust. Even he could not tell if the creature had been totally eradicated with that attack. Combining chaos and void was something he had always thought about, but he had never met an enemy strong enough to make him use it. In this battle with the Dark Seer, he had in fact considered using the true nature of Chaos Flame, which eradicated the existence of monsters completely, making it as though they never existed. But he decided not to, no other reason than because he wanted to gain rewards for what he killed, especially now that he had the privilege of gaining items. It was not like Ul had oversight over this place anyway, because if Ul did, he definitely wouldn't be getting items. Hence, he had prepared a series of attacks he was going to keep using until the floor boss died. The only thing that worried him was deeper floors. Thinking about how dangerously powerful the monsters on deeper floors would be made him understand that there was a 90% probability that Ruffsbuff would evolve from this place. I wonder what floor he is. Even in that tight and tense moment, Northern indeed wondered about several things. For example, he also wondered if Ruffsbuff had fought this monster before. If so, did the monster respawn? Was Ruffsbuff able to deal with it easily? Was his predecessor able to? He hated lagging behind. He wanted to be the best that ever existed, the best that there will be. And with such thoughts rummaging through his head as he patiently waited to see if anything was going to walk out of the now cleared fog of dust, Northern found himself boiling with resolve. His grip tightened, clenched fist squeezing with a subtle whizzing sound, as if the force of his strength alone was crushing his bones. His breath was a bit ragged but growing steady by the second. Finally, Northern could see a soft silhouette flickering as the dust danced like waves of smoke carried hither by the wind. The creature's steps proceeded forward and finally out of the disappearing fog. A dark and wicked grin spread across Northern's face as he saw the shape the bastard was in. "Damn right. I knew it. There's no way you're coming out of that unscathed." Northern had almost hoped the attack was going to kill the Dark Seer once and for all, but he wasn't naive anymore. Not even after when the creature had dared to break Void Force. Perhaps succeeded even. There had to be a chance that the attack, despite how mighty, would not kill the monster. The sad thing, however, would be the creature coming out unscathed. Fortunately for Northern, Chaos and Void, when they teamed together, were not foes anyone should wish for. The fact that the Dark Seer was still standing after taking the attack head-on more than enough proved its immense power. A portion of the creature's face had been mercilessly razed away, revealing raw, sinewy flesh stretched tightly over its skull. Strips of charred skin clung to the exposed muscle, oozing dark fluid in sluggish drips. The crimson glow in its damaged eye flickered weakly, as if on the verge of extinguishing, while its other eye, untouched and blazing with undiminished fury, pierced through the dim surroundings like a blood-red beacon. A gaping chunk had been torn from its shoulder, black ichor spurting intermittently like a faulty fountain. 2 of its hands had been entirely devoured, reduced to ragged stumps, while the lower 2 barely escaped the ferocious onslaught. Scarred but intact, with only a few layers of skin peeled away, revealing raw flesh beneath. On the edges of the wounds gently danced scattered and scanty plumes of black flames. The Dark Seer stared at the wounds on the left side of its body, as if expecting something. But after minutes of not seeing it, an intense grimace climbed its face. The monstrous entity directed its wrath to Northern, the glow in its right eye fiercely burning, as though it was burning for 2 while the other one struggled to even stay alight. The grin on Northern's handsome face grew wider, making him ominously appealing. Aesthetically, "You are strong, I have to give you that. But baby, no one crosses paths with Chaos and Void and remains the same." He raised his chin, smirking with an air of weighted authority emanating from him. "Don't feel too bad. If you work harder, you should be able to live again. As my servant." The blue light in his eyes flickered. Then as he staggered to the left and right, like a drunkard, and shot forward with blinding speed, the light danced, leaving trails of blue light flaring through the darkness of the cave. Northern's form seemed to flicker as he dashed towards the monster. The creature froze for a moment, having only a single eye to track the blurring demon of chaos. Northern moved too fast for the creature to react, especially with only a single functioning eye. His form flickered to the right, a blur of motion. The Dark Seer lunged in that direction, swinging its humongous odachi upward with ferocious strength, aiming to cleave Northern's skull cleanly in 2. But just as the blade arced through empty air, Northern flickered again, his form vanishing like a phantom. The creature's lone eye widened in realization. Too late. Northern had taken to the air, twisting his body mid-flight. As the creature turned to track him, Northern descended on its blind side, a black stiletto clenched in his hand. Without hesitation, he drove the blade into the creature's damaged eye socket, tearing it free with a brutal twist. The force of the attack sent the monster staggering forward, its footing faltering under the sudden shock. Northern landed gracefully, spinning the stiletto in his hand as a second weapon materialized, a gleaming illusion sword shimmering into existence. Before the creature could recover, he closed the distance in a flash, thrusting the stiletto crudely into its jaw. His expression darkened, a twisted grin pulling at the corners of his mouth as he wickedly twisted the blade, black ichor spraying in erratic bursts. The monster ferociously swung its massive sword toward Northern, the sheer weight of the odachi creating an unsteady arc. But Northern had anticipated the reckless strike. With precise timing, he swung his hand outward, meeting the incoming blade head-on. Sparks erupted as steel clashed violently, the force of the parry wrenching the odachi from the creature's grip. The colossal sword spun through the air before crashing into the jagged roof with a deafening clang. Without pause, Northern turned his hand and mercilessly drove the illusion sword deep into the creature's chest, piercing through its metallic skin. Chaos and Void seemed to have done so much damage that the creature's skin could now be pierced, or perhaps Northern just put his all into this attack. Holding the Dark Seer in place, he pinned it down, one weapon embedded in its jaw, the other lodged firmly in its chest. For a brief moment, everything seemed to hang in suspended tension. Then Northern did something severe, something austere and utterly unexpected. Chapter 711. Chaos and Void Part 2. Echo. As he called, Several piercing wounds blasted into the creature's body, dark ichor dripping thickly from the opened wounds. But that was not it. He was not done yet. He opened his mouth. Chaos and void. Northern's mouth grew wider after calling, as if he wanted to eat a mouthful. In front of his mouth, two balls suddenly appeared out of thin air. One pitch black, the other yellowish white. They appeared with a soft radiance, glittering around them and lending a sinister elegance to the scene. As the creature's gaze fixed on the two ominous orbs of light, its resistance turned ferocious, desperation mounting with each passing second. But Northern held fast. With his sword buried deep in the creature's chest and the stiletto lodged in its jaw, he tightened his grip. Slipping his legs between the creatures, he braced himself, anchoring his stance. It was a brutal contest of strength. Two combatants locked in a savage struggle, except only one was truly desperate. The creature thrashed violently, attempting to wrench itself free, pulling its body back in a frantic effort to dislodge Northern's weapons. Though freeing itself from the sword might have been possible, the stiletto was a different matter. It had Northern's grip firmly locked onto its head, keeping its movements restricted. Every twitch of its jaw sent waves of pain searing through its body, the dagger's cruel bite becoming the creature's torment. Suddenly, all of its hands shot forward in unison, aiming to crush Northern in a desperate flurry of attacks. But before they could reach him, dark hands formed of void tendrils erupted from Northern's body, intercepting the monstrous limbs midair. The tendrils coiled tightly, straining as they held the creature's frenzied assault at bay. The two balls of light merged slowly, their glow becoming brighter and more dangerous. The ball, as it merged into a single one, became pale white with a dark and ominous radiance. Northern looked at the dark seer intentionally. It was a cold and strange gaze that bid the monster farewell. He then blew the ball forward with a little air. The ball moved slowly at first, almost lazily drifting through the air like a dandelion seed caught in a breeze. But as it left Northern's lips, its radiance intensified, turning from a soft glow into something far more sinister. The creature's crimson eyes widened in terror, sensing the impending annihilation that came with it. The ball didn't need to move fast. Time seemed to stretch, every heartbeat echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. Northern's eyes flickered with cold finality. Then he spoke, softly just as the ball made contact. Echo! That instant, the cave erupted in a blinding flash of white and black. The sound that followed was like the tearing of fabric, as if the air itself was being ripped apart at the seams. A deafening roar filled the space, drowning out the creature's agonized wails as the blast engulfed it entirely. Void tendrils writhed and twisted in the chaotic storm, latching onto the creature's form and dragging it deeper into the vortex of destruction. The iron-hard limbs that had once swung with merciless strength crumbled like brittle stone. The jagged crown atop its head melted away into nothingness, and its crimson eyes dimmed, flickering out one by one. Northern braced himself, digging his feet into the cracked ground as the shockwave rushed outward. The force of it threatened to hurl him backward, but he held firm. A few void tendrils snaked out of his body and coiled around him like a protective shell. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring the battlefield in a thick, swirling haze. For a long moment, there was silence, absolute and unnerving. Then, slowly, the dust began to settle, revealing the aftermath. In the settling, Northern heard, "You have slain Catastrophic Destroyer, Dark Seer. You have gained plus 12 talent fragments. You have gained a new item. You have recorded an amazing and crazy manner of death. You have gained plus 100 talent fragments. You have facilitated the amalgamation of chaos and void. You have gained plus 5,000 talent fragments. You have forcibly created a new ability. You have gained plus 10,000 talent fragments." Northern froze in shock, slowly moving his head away from the flowing torrents of panels and looking forward. Where the creature once stood was now a gaping crater, edges still glowing faintly with residual essence of chaos and void. The ground was scorched black, fissures spreading out in every direction like a spider's web. Wisps of essence lingered in the air, slowly fading into nothingness. Northern remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the center of the crater. His breath came in ragged gasps and sweat dripped down his face, mingling with the blood from the wound on his cheek. His fingers trembled slightly, still gripping the hilt of his sword. It was really over. The creature, the Dark Seer, was gone, reduced to ash and echoes. And he had gained overwhelming results for it. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his body finally beginning to ease. But even as the adrenaline faded, a strange sense of unease lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something far more dangerous than what he had just faced. And somehow, he felt like he knew what it was. He shook the feeling off his body and sighed, looking around and taking in the gruesome sight that the battle had left. First of all, the entire cavernscape had been iced out. One would think this was a cave of an ice mountain. Jagged cracks on the wall, large craters, and even smaller ones marred the ground in uneven arrays. The entire scenery was an undeniable testament that Northern really outdid himself with this one. It was a tough fight that would have mercilessly killed every 16-year-old with enough courage to dare the same. It's only a destroyer rank, and the first floor boss. Northern did not know for sure, but he assumed that there was probably going to be another floor boss in the next 10 floors, which by logical reasoning should be insanely stronger than this one. Damn Ruffsbuff, you really thought this through, didn't you? As much as Northern wanted to not agree, using such a method, although insane, was madly effective. Especially with how these monsters were heavily stronger than the usual monsters of their ranks and danger level. What exactly did Milwa and Ruffsbuff do? Chapter 7:12. Curse Like a Blessing. Northern did not know what part Milwa played. He did not know where Ruffsbuff had continued from. And the only reason why he suspected Milwa was because he was the founder of the academy. Of course, naturally, he suspected Professor Heimberger too. And he was sure that there was some kind of shady story and deal associated with all of this ominous act. But none of that concerned him, especially now that this had turned out to be a great farm for him. If anything, Northern was beginning to have a growing desire to replicate it in limitless void. Somewhere teeming with live monsters, where he could always head should he want to farm for some fragments. But right now, none of those thoughts and plans mattered. What he just wanted was endless rest. Northern let out an exasperated sigh and spoke. And? We definitely can take it from here. As his vibrant voice rang out in the desolate cavern, a rift tore out of its space and Byron walked out of it, beaming with a lively light in his eyes. Northern observed his gaze and frowned lightly. What are you so damn happy about? Byron shook his head, but the lively look on his face remained, even as he denied their existence. Happy? I am not in the slightest way happy. Northern stared at him for a couple more seconds, his expression uninterested in whatever was going on in the Sword King's head. Tired lines curved lazily beneath his eyes, giving him a slightly afflicted look. He sighed once more and turned around. Whatever. I will be taking my leave now. As he walked away, the shadows rose and engulfed his frame. He vanished completely. Byron still continued to stare in the direction Northern had vanished from, a wide grin tugging at the edges of his lips. He touched his heart and closed his eyes. What is this beat? Dear heart, do you feel it too? The glory and splendor of our master? His might. He paused, his eyes glinting with a red that seemed enchanted, encroached by something dangerous. Then he said eerily, Arg, my soul, my body, my blood. Everything is boiling with so much excitement. Thank you, Master, for choosing me to be your humble servant. His face twisted with revulsion, lips curling as though the very air around him reeked of something foul. A wicked gleam ignited in his eyes, a gleam born of celestial malice. Slowly, he turned his gaze downward, toward the smoldering remains of the Dark Seer, its charred form reduced to brittle ash by the merciless attack of chaos and void. He raised his leg and began to furiously stomp on that ground. You wretched filth, defiler! How dare you draw the blood of my master? I will hunt down your kind, every last one, and grant them a death so gruesome that their souls will writhe in torment long after their bodies are ash. The cave trembled violently as he furiously stomped on that ground. Northern reached his room, did not bother taking off anything. There was nothing to take off anyway, and fell lazily on his bed, sank into his thoughts, but before he could get to any considerable depth of reminiscence, his consciousness drifted away by the winds of slumber. A few hours later, his eyes subtly opened. Drool had mapped over his white sheets. He frowned slightly at the unusual occurrence and rolled, his eyes staring softly at the white and simple ceiling. The air suddenly carried the smell of his drool into his nose. A stale, sour musk with a hint of salt, as though remnants of restlessness and dreamlessness had fermented. Wow, I must have been really tired. Northern tried to recount a moment where he had drooled, but none came to mind. I didn't even drool when I slept in a lake. To be particular, at the edge of the lake. Maybe the details did not matter. Northern shrugged away the light numbness of his body and stood up. He walked over to the small table clock on his study table and took a brief look. A small frown creased on his forehead. Damn it! He turned away and walked towards the door, spirit linen forming the same casual clothing from before over his body. Northern opened his door quickly and stepped out. After a few minutes, Northern was briskly walking towards the private forge. The sunlight had completely sunk into the horizon. The night had opened its curtains, bathing the plants, streams, and roofs with a lightless glow. Northern narrowed his eyes, frowning a bit as he sighted someone sitting on the short wall of the forge, their legs playfully swinging in the air. As the person heard his footsteps, their head turned, immediately crimson eyes coming to life with a radiant sparkle of stars. "You came!" Josie shouted. Northern, slightly shocked, responded to her in a low tone. "And you waited." He had not expected her to. He had spent an entire day sleeping, and today was the last night before the Milwa festival would begin. First of all, he had no idea he had spent an entire day in the dungeon, or had he? Whatever time he came back, he slept from that time until the evening of the next day. And he had set an appointment with Josie for the morning of that day in faith that he would have the answer to her prayers. Now, not only did he not have the answer she sought, he had not even been able to experiment it on the one scapegoat of a prisoner he had in the limitless void. And the poor girl seemed to have waited an entire day for him. She really wants to do away with such an ability. One man's food indeed could be another man's poison. Anybody would kill for a chance like this. A chance to obtain an EX-class talent. Feeling a bit like a dubious fellow, Northern sighed and spoke to her one last time. "Are you really sure about this? Anybody would climb to the peak of the highest mountain even with fragile bones to get a talent like yours. And then they'd discover that it can only make them weaker than they already are?" A dark radiance from the night draped over her face, solemnly reflecting its depth, while the yellowish glow of her eyes shone even brighter, more resplendent than ever. "I have had these since I was young. A blessing in the hands of a cursed girl. It has done worse to me. A mundane life would be way better, please. Just take it away. I want to leave this hellish hole as soon as I can." She tightly shut her eyes as she declared once more. Northern could feel the pain in her words. Fortunately for his conscience, the poor girl really wanted the talent gone. She had resolved herself defiantly. He sighed and said, "Well then, I will help you take it away." Northern extended his hand to the girl's head and gently placed it on her scarlet hair. His mind focused on a single thought. Her true name. Although he still couldn't be sure that he'd get the talent when he gets the name, he couldn't be sure about anything since he had never used this ability on a drifter before. But he had a responsibility to try anyway. To his surprise, it worked. Conditions have been met. Chapter 713. Formless and Nameless. Conditions have been met. You can absorb the name of the target. Target has been discerned to be human. Note that if their name is absorbed, they will be forever nameless. Do you want to absorb their talent? Looking at the second to the last message and the last message, Northern couldn't help but feel like it was a warning of something dire. But Josie had resolved herself more than enough. Any more throbbing would just be a bother. He sighed and responded internally. Yes. Absorbing name, the Titan's Reckoning. As the panel appeared after his response, Northern suddenly felt a strong pull, like something very huge was trying to grab hold of him from inside her. He lost consciousness for a brief second, his eyeballs disappearing as his head fell back. But in the next moment, Chaos Eyes flared open, its splintered pupils rolling around Northern Scara. He paused mid-fall, his hand still connected to Josie's head. Then he straightened, a defiant blue fire burning viciously in his eyes. Whatever it was that just gnawed at him and threatened to swallow him whole, Northern looked like he was ready to turn the tables on it. Although, at that moment, Northern was not completely aware. The most aware he had been was few moments before he was suddenly knocked out by the humongous entity. A generous amount of Northern's void essence sprayed out viciously in the shape of several unstable spikes, seeming to materialize into an almost liquid form. Bluish-black smoking liquid fell on the ground with a sizzling sound, the color of the nearby leaves snuffed out of them with barely a touch from the viscous liquid. Josie stayed beneath Northern's hand. The same thing that had happened to Northern seemed to have happened to her. Her head had slightly fallen, her eyeballs also vanished from their sclera. The strange state of the void essence danced on Northern's hand, reaching her head. Then it tipped at the edges of his fingers, seeping into her hair. A subtle smoke oozed out of her head as the essence softly sank in. The pull got stronger and even more powerful, as if he was tussling with the force of a whirlpool in an ocean. He felt almost helpless with it and was slowly losing his grip. Taking the young girl's name had proved to be a more daunting task than anyone had thought. Although pseudo-conscious, Northern could feel the dangerous grip of whatever force was behind that name on his soul so strong. The more he tried to resist, the stronger it got. It was a point where he couldn't even tell what could happen next. Not being able to absorb the name might be the least of his worries at this point. Massive unseen hands gripped Northern's entire soul so powerfully that he seemed to be shrinking within the grasp. He could feel it vividly. Something with an immense strength was preventing him from taking the name, perhaps the force of the name itself. But he could not see anything. And by the second, the titanic grip seemed to be crushing his soul. Until all of a sudden it didn't hurt anymore. It looked as though he had lost the battle and been crushed completely by the force, leaving his soul damaged and broken. However, passive ability Demon of Change is affecting Formless and Nameless. Names absorbed are being converted into shards to feed Formless and Nameless. Formless is growing. Nameless is growing. The vivid feeling of the strong grip was gone. It was still there, only that Northern felt unbothered by it. He felt like he was a mass of liquid within the grip. The more it pressed, the more his form slipped out of the grip like trying to grip water. It was just impossible. Northern felt strange and slightly bothered about the way he was feeling. But this was his moment. He could not let an opportunity like this slip past him. Northern pushed more essence towards the tip of his finger. With void essence backing him, Nameless grew even stronger. It was the force that was affecting the state of the void essence and giving it this strange form. The Titan's Reckoning resisted even more fiercely as Northern's essence got closer to its root. It thrashed and thrashed within the young girl, but Northern's form towered over it like a giant, gripping its source with an equally titanic force and pulling it out of its root. Northern pulled his hand away from the girl's head, dragging out a dark scarlet squirming ball of essence with a tiny radiant scarlet core. He clenched hard on the essence, its radiance slipping through his fingers. The night around the forge was illuminated with a soft scarlet glow as Northern struggled to keep the stubborn name at bay. It wiggled dangerously, pulling Northern's fingers apart and forcefully breaking them. Its resistance was strong. It was undoubtedly a powerful name. Northern grinned sinisterly and held on even more powerfully. His fingers instantly repaired almost at the rate the name was breaking them. With trembling arms and sweat pooling on his face, he plunged the essence towards his body. The bastard continued to resist, pulling Northern's hand backward. The grin on Northern's lips widened, a wicked glint lighting his eyes. Too bad for you. Void tendrils snaked out of his belly and grabbed the essence, absorbing it completely and returning to his stomach. Northern dropped to his knee, pearls of sweat dropping on the concrete floor in quick succession. Crap! Just how strong is that bast? He suddenly let out a painful groan, grabbing hold of his stomach as a biting pain assaulted him. Northern collapsed and curled on the cold floor, biting down on his lips to stop himself from screaming. His body became paler, scarlet veins visibly stretching beneath the surface. It started from his face until it had snaked across his entire body. Then it began to pulsate, growing brighter with a radiant scarlet glow before it suddenly dimmed and faded. The pain slowly subsided. Northern could not stand yet as his body felt numb and sore at the same time. But he heard and despite his closed eyes could see. Your body has evolved. Congratulations. Nameless has evolved to unwritten. Congratulations. Formless has evolved to omniform. Congratulations. You have gained a second name. Congratulations. You have gained a soul core. Congratulations. You have gained a talent. You have gained 5 new talent abilities. Chapter 7:14 Flight. Northern had not the strength to move away from his position despite the waves of joy that thrashed tumultuously inside his soul. The soreness in his body lingered, perhaps a consequence of his newly evolved form. He had expected to feel stronger, but instead, his muscles ached as if rebelling against the change. A few seconds after the system's announcement, he heard Josie's silvery voice. Sir Rian? Sir Rian. It was the first time Northern had heard his name from her. Though he didn't care much for it, he couldn't help but notice how the girl, who had portrayed herself as indifferent and troublesome, now sounded genuinely concerned. So noisy. Northern raised a finger, finally making the girl shut up. You are alive. Oh, thank my stars, you are alive. I thought I got you killed. She sank her face into his arms, muffling her voice as it fell with sobs. Northern slowly moved his other hand, petting the young girl's head. He spoke weakly. I'm fine. It was just a little bit more difficult than I expected. She raised her head and looked at him, her expression a mixture of relief and guilt. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause you so much pain. I didn't know it would. It's fine. I was the one who underestimated your talent. Noticing that the yellowish glow in her eyes had vanished, replaced by black, he frowned slightly and propped himself up. So, how do you feel? Josie took a moment to examine her hands, clenching and unclenching them before running them over her face. Her eyes widened, and her hands trembled. I feel empty. She slowly stood up, her eyes scrunching fondly as tears pooled at the base of her lids and streamed down her cheeks. I feel so good. Sitting there, Northern watched her with a small smile on his lips. On the other hand, he wasn't feeling so good, but he knew he would be fine. He sighed and looked at the joyful girl. Then he said, extending his right hand toward her, "Help me up." Quickly, Josie grabbed hold of Northern's hands and pulled him up. Northern stretched his muscles a bit. He could finally feel the soreness leaving subtly. He also could accurately tell the differences after standing and stretching for a bit. His body looked slightly different. The usual paleness had gained a slight warmth. Now he looked more like the living and less like the dead. But his muscles had gained more rigidity than before. He could feel it with every slight movement. He could also feel a strange and unexplainable elasticity in his muscles. He knew for sure that his body had gained more peculiarities. And that was the tip of the changes that had happened to him. He could not wait to check them out. It's late. You should go and rest. I need to rest too, he said to Josie. The girl smiled heartily and nodded. Goodbye and good luck on the Milwa Festival. I will be rooting for you from the Central Plains. Her voice rang out like bright lights dancing on puffy clouds. Northern smiled, closing his eyes for a moment as he nodded to her. Thank you. He watched the girl walk away, and after she had completely left, he spread his spatial awareness. As expected, it had increased. Before he could only perceive just the vicinities of the non-combative school, but now, he could perceive the whole of Milgard Academy and its island. He waited a bit, making sure that Josie had entered the vicinity of the combative school and was heading towards her dormitory. He closed his eyes and breathed. Let's see what has become of my body. It was his body. All he needed to do was pay extra attention to it. He instinctively knew what it could now do. Northern opened his eyes, and like a spear thrown vertically by an invisible force, he was lifted into the air, leaving fading traces of blue and red afterimages. He came to an abrupt pause in the middle of the dark clouds and looked down on the academy. The large compound of edifices before his eyes resembled a miniature kingdom, with its tall spires and fortified walls glowing faintly under the light of the two moons. The surrounding forest and the red cloud beyond framed the island, making it appear like a floating citadel in the night. Even his base eyes had become sharper. From his position, he could see every detail with startling clarity. The distant movement of students in the combative school courtyard and the flickering of lanterns in the dormitory windows were as clear to him as if he stood mere feet away. His lips curled up, and without warning, he shot forward, slicing through the air like a comet, the red and blue afterimages trailing behind him. He soared over the academy, testing his speed and maneuverability. With each movement, he felt more in sync with his body, as if it had become a finely tuned instrument waiting to be mastered. After several minutes of flying, he landed softly on the roof of one of the tallest towers in the academy. The wind whispered around him, carrying the faint sounds of the night. He examined the quiet scenery like its guardian, then took off, flying with a swift light that faded almost as it appeared. Northern's form was completely gone. Then he appeared in his room and slumped on his bed, his face full of life. He never thought that flying could be so much fun. But it was time to check his rewards, starting from yesterday. Northern sat up and summoned the system. Profile. Name: Rian Artemis Riem Guard, Northern Long Guard. True name: Unwritten, the Titan's Reckoning. Attributes: Formless, Limitless Void, Vestige of Chaos, Chaos Eyes, Chaotic Regeneration, Chaos Flame, Seed of Void, Chaos Infusion, Chaotic Resonance, Chaos and Void. Soul Rank: Transient. Void Summons: 12/100. Talent Fragments: 56165/6000. Copied Talents: 5 out of 6. Owned Talents: 3. Attribute Abilities: Active/Passive. October 11th. Owned Items: Molten Vein, Night Terror, Illusioned Hefter, Plate of 1,000 Eyes, and 19 others. Chapter 7:15. A New Name. The first thing Northern noticed was the new name. The number in superscript that depicted the amount of names he had copied so far had disappeared. The names had indeed been used to reinforce his true name and main attribute. And the new name he gained was boldly outlined next to his evolved name, although it was grayed out. And just as Northern focused on it for a moment, wondering as to why it was, the name shone subtly and a new panel popped out before his eyes, requesting, "Do you want to change your name?" Due to unique effect of Omniform, your soul can take whatever form of name you absorb. Upon name change, all attributes and abilities tied to Unwritten will be unavailable to you, because you are not under the influence of its name. Northern was met with a mixture of emotions. It was slightly difficult to process whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. He had gained a talent without having to spend a dime, but while using the talent he wouldn't be able to access other abilities. Does that include my regenerative abilities and void force? Northern's gaze lingered on the floating panel for a couple of seconds. Then he blinked slowly and responded internally. As he did, the floating panel of his profile shimmered like a glitch and the runes on it began to change, new runes burning out of the background and overwriting the old ones. Profile. Name: Rian Artemis Riem Guard, Northern Long Guard. True name: Unwritten, the Titan's Reckoning. Attribute: Titan's Resilience. Soul Rank: Transient. Soul Core Saturation: Low. Talent: Titan's Wrath. Talent Class: EX. Talent Ability: Colossal Force, Earthbreaker. Unyielding Bulwark, Titan's Leap. Weight of the world. Colossal force. Your physical strength is greatly amplified, allowing you to shatter stone, uproot massive trees, and knock back enemies with devastating force. Every punch or stomp creates shockwaves that ripple through the environment. Earthbreaker. When you slam the ground with immense force, a violent earthquake is generated. This ability can split the ground, destabilize structures, and create massive craters, making it ideal for controlling large battlefields. Unyielding bulwark. Your body becomes temporarily as tough as a mountain, drastically reducing incoming damage. While active, you are resistant to all forms of harm, but this ability greatly fatigues the body afterward. Titan's Leap. You can launch yourself into vast distances by harnessing your immense leg strength. Upon landing, you create a destructive shockwave that pulverizes everything within a large radius. This immense leg strength can also be taken advantage of in several other ways, for example kicking a target when the ability is activated. Weight of the world. You can, with your physical presence, exert an oppressive gravitational force on your surroundings, causing the ground to crack and weaker enemies to be immobilized by the sheer pressure of your strength. Northern's lips curled. It's a great ability on the bright side of things. I can just switch in and out for what this one lacks. He beamed satisfactorily and looked at the new panel. Northern was about to change his name back when he noticed something. He focused on it clearly, and there it still was, staring back at him. Soul core saturation? What do I need that for? He was silent for a while. Then his mouth slowly parted as the realization dawned on him. Wait, does this mean I can now grow without talent fragments? But that would mean such growth would be possible only when he was using this name. Would Void Essence still be available to him? How exactly is this growth possible? If it wasn't, the system would not have bothered putting it there. Northern had so many questions, and the only way to get the answers was to test this peculiar ability of his. There was a ground for that, but time was not his friend anymore. The night was getting thicker. Although the winds of sleep did not faze him one bit, he still had a lot of preparation to do, and it would be to his benefit if he stayed rested. Sighing, Northern changed his name only with the thought of it, and his familiar panel shimmered back into existence. He couldn't lie, there was a feeling of home with this one. It was somewhat unexplainable, but it was certified. Now, on to the other things. Northern's eyes rolled down the panel. As Northern found what he was looking for, another panel popped up. Name: Chaos and Void. Type: active. Description: at a point, the Chaos Prince began to explore the possibility of coexistence between Chaos and Void. Even though the two primordial existences being a counterpart of each other, one born from the other, the Chaos Prince could not find a way to bring them together as one. The Chaos Prince began to dive into the depths of Void to find and unravel its source. Chaos he was a prince of, and Void he knew not much of. Hence he decided to reach the depth of Void that was impossible, the entrance of the Echo Realm. This was where his consciousness was last noted. You have carried on with the Chaos Prince's will, and are moving closer to the depths of both Void and Chaos like he did. Northern lingered for a couple of seconds. The story was striking, and that was all there was to it. There was no ability, nothing else aside from the description. Of course, it was a skill he had used, so should he need to use it again, he knew just how to cook it. But that was not his worry or his thoughts right now. Northern read the description over and over again, having a keen feeling that something was familiar about it. Then, on his 9th reading, he remembered those specific words. They were the words that carried the description of the vestige of Chaos and Void. The incomplete words. The Chaos Prince began to dive into the he discovered, and not much he. Northern muttered the words. As he did, he was even more sure. The one thing he did not lack was retentive memory. After the vestige got divided with the growth of Void over Chaos, he lost the incomplete description and did not care much for it at the time. However, now it was back and for some reason complete. It gave Northern a deeper understanding into the mysteries surrounding the Chaos Prince, and also made his confusion grow. I thought the Origins killed the Chaos Prince. What is this about Echo Realm? And this Echo Realm? It was the second time he was hearing of it. At this point, Northern began to feel the need to question what it was. Chapter 7:16. God of Evolution Part 1. For the many things he could do nothing about, he tried not to worry. Instead, Northern moved on to the next agenda on the panel. He stared at the new runes and with his consent, it spilled more information on a new tab. Name: Plate of 1,000 Eyes. Type: Shield. Grade: Legendary. Order: 3. Description: The watchful gazes of Syrinx, never close, even though cut off from its source. Order ability: Watchful gaze, glimpse, bloodthirst. Northern studied the order abilities. Watchful gaze. The eyes of Syrinx are forever open, but they now serve the wielder of this ominous plate. The shield is capable of discerning attack patterns and swinging to block them on its own. Note: this ability is only usable while the shield is equipped. Wow! Interesting. Northern nodded his head as he scrolled to the next with his eyes. Glimpse. The eyes of Syrinx are capable of casting a bright red light, temporarily blinding every other person except its wielder. Bloodthirst. The shield can release a massive amount of bloodthirst that encroaches people and coaxes them into a mindless frenzy of attack. Satisfied with what he was seeing, Northern nodded his head with a small smile, leaving his face almost as quick as it came. He raised his hand, stretching his muscles up while his eyes stayed fixed on the panel. Then he cleared away all other panels to focus on the main one, which was his profile panel. Under the profile panel, he selected his own talents. Own talents 3. Copied talents 5. Northern's own talents would have been 5 also if not for his gluttonous body consuming 2. Still, they were not completely lost. Soul Sight was actively working in his eyes while Windstride in his legs. But still, that pang of regret still lingered, especially now that he wanted to evolve all of them to their peak. He shrugged. I can't have it all, I guess. He turned back to the floating runes before his eyes. Own talents 3. Copied talent 5. Talent Erasure. Class B. Talent True. Name Forgotten Curse. Description: A livid curse that plagues all it sets its eyes upon. Talent ability: Lock. Unlock.
Attributes. Potencial.
Talent progression: 0/500. I'm going to start with this. If his memory served him right, Northern did not remember ever spending a dime on this talent. The talent had been just the way he copied it from Jeskai. He looked forward to what it would be at Class EX. And thus, he began the evolution. 500 talent fragments have been deducted. Congratulations! Talent Erasure B has evolved to a new class, Potencial A. 1,000 talent fragments have been deducted. Congratulations! Talent Potencial A has evolved to a new class, Chains of Oblivion S. 3,000 talent fragments have been deducted. Congratulations! Talent Chains of Oblivion S has evolved to a new class, Dimensional Chains SS. 5,000 talent fragments have been deducted. Congratulations! Talent Dimensional Chains SS has evolved to a new class, Forgotten Curse SSS. Northern paused. He was at first tempted to stop there, but he shook his head against it. What's the use of getting money if not for the spending? Evolve to final class. Evolving Talent Forgotten Curse SSS to Class EX. 10,000 talent fragments have been deducted. Congratulations! Talent Forgotten Curse SSS has been evolved to a new class, Oblivion's Mark EX. Talent Name Oblivion's Mark. Class Kex. Origin Oberon. Description: The talent's link to the constellation of Oblivion has gotten stronger. Even though his existence has been forgotten, you have found a trace of his legacy. Perhaps through you he can strive to unseal his dreadful curse. Talent ability: Absolute Lock. Nullify. Curse Reversal. Northern saw the description and immediately began to shake his head. No. 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 Nu. Oberon? A constellation of oblivion? Trying to use him to break free? No, absolutely not. He did not want in on any of that. This was the complete opposite of what he was trying to do. Staying off-grid with Ul and Tensely the Tyrants and Origins was already enough. Adding Constellation to the equation is an unfair level of damnation for him. Besides, aren't those bastards supposed to not have a will of their own? Has the world been lied to? No, that can't be. He was slightly convinced that this was not the case, because he had read the era of constellations and was knowledgeable about how things existed. Constellations were like entities of existence, powers that be, but complied strictly to the law of nature, which in this case was Ul. Oblivion could also be part of those powers that be, but for Oblivion to be Oblivion, he needed to be forgotten and stay forgotten. The essence of the constellation was that they were quiddities of power that maintained and governed the law of existence, and they had not a will of their own. So therefore, the forgotten constellation trying to break its curse is very strange, and no matter what, Northern was not going to get involved in it. That, however, meant that he would use the talent less. I usually have it for last resort purposes anyway, so there should be no problem with that. Northern examined the talent a bit more. Absolute Lock. Completely seal an opponent's talent abilities, movement, or even thoughts. Nullify. Erase essence, talent attacks, or constructs from existence by touching them. Curse Reversal. Reflect any attack or negative energy back to its source, amplifying its effect. This one has the same effect as my new talent. Northern noticed as he read the last line of runes. Although it was the same, there were slight differences. The reversal from Len's ability could store damages and dedicate the amount to return, while this one amplified its effect fully. Still, it was a good one. The most interesting part was the abilities that would be unlocked as he progressed in soul rank. Northern moved on to the next one. His day 1. Cloning. 3,000 talent fragments have been deducted. Talent Cloning, S, has been evolved to Xerox, SS. 5,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent Xerox, SS, has been evolved to Individuality, SSS. 10,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent Individuality has been evolved to One True Self, EX. Talent Name, One True Self. Class, Kex. Origin, Khonshu. Description. The constellation of consciousness, also known as Eldek, a constellation broadly worshipped as the first of his kind and the husband of Ul, leaks his sanity into your talent. Talent ability. True Clone. Soul Synchronization. Limitless 1. Northern's mouth fell again as he yet saw the same thing in this talent. He had thought that the peculiarity of Erasure's description had something to do with the talent alone. But the same thing was happening with cloning too. Northern frowned. Don't tell me. Chapter 717. God of Evolution, Part 2. Northern had sort of an idea of it before entering the academy. After entering the academy and burying his brain in books, that idea had escalated into a small room of knowledge. He could say with surety that as every soul generated from a certain constellation, and there were 12 constellations in total, which further progressed to become the 12 markings of time flow sequence of Ultrael into 12 months, each month named after the constellations. Because it was blasphemy for their names to be uttered by mortal mouth. For beings without active consciousness, Northern could not understand what the deal was with that particular rule. It was not as if they would strike one down with thunder. They can't because they are not actively conscious. The constellations operated on passive consciousness. One could consider them more or less trees.
Elfach, Eldech, Elsain, Amenes, Metimnis, Tach, Yeslvine, Turquoise, Rautaurn, Orion, Temeries, and Davon.
Northern muttered out all the names of the months of the year in their right order. Right now, it was the second week of Devon, the last month of the year. That's true. The year is coming to an end. No signs of it could be seen, given how strict the academy was with celebrations. No events were celebrated, and unaccounted outsiders were never allowed onto the island. The only exception was the Milwa Festival, marking the academy's founding. Saving himself from the slight derailment of thought, Northern brought his eyes down to the floating panel and sighed. He stood up, pacing to and fro in his room. Because each soul is rooted from one of the 12 constellations, their core carries a hereditary pattern to the constellation that served as its source. Of course, this does not mean that every soul that comes from the constellation carries the same essence of the constellation. Several factors came into the mix. Attributes, for example, along with the natural essence of individuals themselves, each playing as large a role as the root of the soul. The constellations. Even after extensive reading, Northern had not been able to account for them all. But he had made a lot of progress as regards knowledge, flying far away from where he was before entering the academy. As a drifter's soul rank increases, they are on a journey to the root and source of their soul. The closer they get, the stronger they become. It is why they gain more skills and have more grasp on essence control, and finally when one becomes a paragon, it is said that their soul literally evolves. Although Northern had never seen one, it is said that a paragon can transform. They gain a stark, clear personality of their soul which they can manifest as a body. Northern had been able to establish a closer journey, not by soul evolution, but through talent evolution. So one could say each talent counts for a soul of their own? Or did this mean that it was the talent itself that was tied to the constellations, not the soul? Or it's all the same? Either way, Northern, although he couldn't tell for sure, smelled that trouble was coming. Surely thickening ties with nothing to show for it can't be good. It's not like the personality of their bond with the constellations has a body to manifest through. Northern was correct, and this was the source of his fear. He stopped, covering his face with his palms. He let out a frustrated groan and sat back down on his bed. Northern was silent for a couple of minutes before he decided to continue the abilities inspection. True clone. Each clone now retains 100% of the original's power and can evolve independently, developing different skill sets. Soul synchronization. You and your clones share senses, energy, and soul state. Damage received by one clone is distributed across all clones. Limitless 1. The clones are no longer limited by the original's strength. They can individually surpass the creator, forming a new pinnacle of talent. All these abilities indeed were a great boon. In fact, Northern found it difficult to close his mouth after reading them, and his eyes wouldn't stop blinking. This meant that he could now exist in multiple selves and still be himself. He could grow outside his own real body. Although these amazing effects come to be tied together by soul synchronization, because when harm comes to one, harm comes to all. Even so, it applies to the clones, not the original. Evolution certainly decreased the number of talent abilities that advanced cloning had, but that was also fine to Northern. These 3 abilities were overpowering enough. More so, he would receive more as he grew. He still has a paragon to become, and then a zenith. Northern grinned, revealing his clean white teeth, enough to make one think he modeled for a toothpaste company. His eyes danced with colorful lights in their depths. The developments grew more dangerous as the talent's ties to their source thickened, yet they also became increasingly intriguing. Now to the final event and the highlight of them all. His grin widened. Northern first inspected the amount of talent fragments he had spent. He had 18,665 talent fragments left. Let's hope it's enough. Nsare Embers. 1,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent. Nsare Embers has evolved to a new class Nsare Flames. 3,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent. Nsare Flames. Has evolved to a new class Flamewalker. 5,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent. Flamewalker. Has evolved to a new class Eternal Embers. Talent fragments not enough to evolve to a new class. Northern frowned. What are those bastards doing anyway? His summons were supposed to be down in the dungeon, actively farming fragments for him. Just as Northern thought about it, the system resounded. 10,000 talent fragments have been consumed. Talent. Eternal Embers. Has evolved to a new class Sun's Legacy. Northern let out a satisfied sigh and opened the talent panel. Talent name, Son's Legacy. Class, Kex.
Origin, Darkshire.
Description. The talent's bond to its root grows ever strongly, finding root in the flames that burn relentlessly, caring for nothing, bounded by no shackles and in hooves that trample on the earth with pounding heart, racing as far as the wind guides. Talent ability, Ignis Dominus, Ashen Eternity, Solar Nova, Omnithermic Sense, Twilight Phoenix, Pyreheart Ascendant, Embers of Oblivion, Solar Ascension. Chapter 718, Early Puberty. The morning in the academy was unusual. The atmosphere, even the clouds, were a veil of white. Fog drifted around the compound of the academy, thicker than usual. It was like a towering white wall that stretched to the sky. The night surely had retreated for the moment and allowed the day to resume its work, but it seemed to have forgotten one of its belongings, the cold. And the day, despite being so early, seemed to be using a generous amount of it without a care in the world for the shivering and curling students in their beds. Northern had a considerable resistance to cold and heat, yet even he was not aware when he dragged out a duvet from his wardrobe and rolled it around his body. He woke up feeling like a hot dog in a wrap. The first thing Northern did was run over to his table to check the time. Luckily for him, he had not woken up late like he did last time. It was still the early hours of the morning, before people had even begun to wake. After seeing the time, Northern smiled and stretched his hands and muscles into the air. Yesterday's night had been very eventful for him. All his own talents had become EX class. It was impossible to upgrade copied talents. The best Northern could have done was maneuver them thanks to DIY and his knowledge and ability to tamper with the soul. But that would cost him a useless amount of stamina and might have consequences. For example, even after copying and upgrading several talents of the Starchasers, it was not reflecting in his copied talent. That was because of the manner in which he had maneuvered to upgrade and tether the talents to each individual. He still had access to the talents and could properly copy them if there were any need to. But none of the talents interested him. Maybe only Aster's lightning talent. He did not want to maneuver his way to evolving those talents without getting them exclusively. The fear of such made him pause. Besides, his reserves of fragments had been exhausted and were just being refilled by his summons. All of them, even the new ones. Hence, it was getting up really quickly. Applying paste on his brush, Northern walked into his toilet and faced the rectangular mirror, staring at himself. His hands immediately began to crawl over his face as he noted the changes. Is it me, or do I look older? Northern knew how he looked the last time he saw himself. He was how a 16-year-old should be. But right now, ignoring his olive skin and its warm undertone, he looked like he had just slept through 2 years of his life in one night and went straight to hit puberty. Not to mention the height too. Last Northern remembered, he did not have to bend to fit into the rectangular mirror. Damn, did I sleep through 5 years? Northern leaned on the washing basin below the mirror to properly fit in. However, he had not completely rested on it when the basin peeled off the wall and shattered on the ground. Startled, Northern took a step back, looking down and blinking several times. He raised his hands and looked at both palms. Then a terrified grin crawled on his face. I guess it did not just end with being able to fly. Apparently, Northern had no idea, but from the moment he could fly until he slept, the changes in his body were still taking effect. And now, after several hours, they had fully come into play. He was still the same. Anyone who knew him would definitely not find it hard to recognize him, but they would notice the change. Lucky for him, he did not have to be worried about anything, because today was the beginning of the Milwa Festival, and he would be seeing more of the combative school and less of the non-combative school. And even after the festival, he was going to be transferring to the artificing course, so he would not see those guys anymore. Still, the change was very concerning. Northern bent into the mirror slightly and observed. His lean muscles were peak before but had gotten even better. He blinked several times, still adjusting to the strange changes in his body. His reflection stared back at him with a mix of familiarity and foreignness. The muscles beneath his olive skin were now more defined, as if they had undergone months of rigorous training overnight. He leaned in closer to the mirror, running a hand over his jawline, which seemed sharper, more mature. This is going to take some getting used to, he thought, straightening up. Northern shook his head, brushing aside the unsettling thoughts. He had more pressing matters to attend to. Today marked the start of the Milwa Festival, a grand celebration commemorating the Academy's founding. Today was the beginning of his dominion of the school. After quickly finishing his morning routine, Northern changed into his uniform, which, to his dismay, felt slightly tighter around the shoulders and chest. So, he decided to put it away and ask the spirit linen to copy it and wear it on him instead. The conscious cloth complied and merged with Northern, softly revealing into his uniform almost with the subtleness of a chameleon. After that, Northern stepped out of his room and hurried to the dining hall where he met with Aster. The poor chatterbox seemed to have changed for the better. It must not have been easy for him, even though all he had to do was watch Northern break the will of the other two. His fear of Northern had soared through the sky in 2 nights, and he was very thankful that he did not meet Northern again after that. He was able to sleep without being terrorized. He had been dreading the moment he would meet Northern again. But when he saw Northern, first from afar, he was shocked, and that shock for a moment pushed away the fear he had. He conversed with Northern normally until he remembered who he was talking to and suddenly became a grave of silence. The dormitory had fewer than 100 students, many among which were combative students. As they walked around the hall with their food, their eyes were alight with a joyful glow. Northern could tell they were as happy and excited about this as he was. This made him genuinely happy. He wanted to crush not just their might but their souls. Have their excitement and expectations so raised, then totally crush it. Just imagine it, a nobody from the non-combative school single-handedly crushing every damn person and winning the Milwa Festival. A grin viciously adorned his face. Chapter 719. The beginning of Milwa Festival. For the first time since Northern had been admitted to the academy, he saw the general populace of both the combative and non-combative schools gathered together. They moved in distinct groups, clearly ostracizing the few non-combative students who had dared to enter the festival contest. All marched toward the multipurpose hall set up just outside the school compound. Its location near the gate ensured everyone had to walk an equal distance to reach it. As they neared their destination, a sense of familiarity stirred in Northern. The paths they took felt oddly recognizable, and the glass building ahead seemed like a forgotten echo of the past. When they stepped inside the grand hall, bathed in a warm golden glow that danced across polished walls and floors, the realization struck him like a sudden chill. This was the same hall where they had all been gathered before being deceived and teleported into the Dark Continent. Northern's expression darkened, but he quickly masked it, his face becoming an unreadable canvas. A gloomy tension pressed against him like a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned to his left. There stood a boy, utterly consumed by rage, his anger so palpable that even the strongest individuals around felt the oppressive weight of his bloodlust. Northern's gaze flicked to a yellow-haired boy nearby, who glanced in their direction with a wary frown. Further ahead, 2 figures, one a girl, the other a boy, watched them intently. Their skin, polished to a bronze-like sheen, seemed to glow faintly beneath the hall's golden lights. Just like Vita's. Ha! Those guys look familiar. The memory surfaced quickly. Northern remembered clearly. Back at Fugal, at the warp port, 2 of them had looked at him in a strange, assessing manner. Back then, he hadn't given them much attention, though he could tell they were indeed strong. It was the same now, perhaps slightly different. Because of how strong he had become overnight, he could tell in an instant. Not just with them alone, every single person in the academy, every single person that fell under the reach of his spatial awareness. He could tell that none of them, none at all, was strong enough to leave a lasting battle impression on him. Perhaps among the instructors he could pick about 2 that were strong. Even though they suppressed their auras to the minimum, Northern could still tell. Those 2 were the strongest in the academy, stronger than even Annette. How odd! Northern shifted his attention as he saw the group of instructors walk onto the podium. He finally turned to the boy next to him and gave him a knock on the middle of his head. The boy immediately snarled, turning all his anger toward Northern. In that moment, as he dared, he suddenly felt the entire scenery around him transform. A colossal wall of engulfing darkness closed in on him with terrifying speed, and the guy that had just knocked him appeared like a terror, standing with 4 crimson eyes and viciously carved teeth. He staggered back, beads of sweat already dripping down his face. "Huh? Are you okay, Daryl?" His friend, who had been casually standing next to him, asked with concern. I'm fine." Got dizzy for a moment. He responded, wiping his sweat off with his sleeves before focusing on the front. He couldn't even steal glances at the person standing next to him, afraid of seeing the same thing again. After a few seconds, as the instructors were awaiting the principal's arrival to give the opening speech, he said to his friend, "Hey Aaron, let's find somewhere else to stand. Okay? Why? But this place is just fine. I can see the podium clearly from here. Bro, let's go." Daryl walked away, grabbing his friend. Northern glanced in their direction as they walked away. "Fool, releasing all that bloodlust. Before whom do you think you stand?" Northern understood that the boy was probably as angry as he was, but the fact that he couldn't keep himself under control proved how little he had learned in the Dark Continent. Probably one of the men that were under Zephyr. He had killed many whom Afcon commanded directly. Most of the survivors were people that had marched with Zephyr to conquer the Lotheloan stronghold. The boy was most likely one of them. Northern's eyes focused back on the podium as the principal, flanked by 2 instructors. One on his right and, surprisingly, Annette on his left, walked forward. What is she doing there? They reached the center of the podium, the 2 flanks retreating to the line of instructors standing behind while the principal alone walked toward the lectern-like structure through which several mics protruded. The man was as ordinary as one could define ordinary. His gray hair was slicked back, several wrinkles spread over his face showing rather than telling his aging state. His eyes were calm and insightful, slowly rolling over the crowds of heads with palpable tenderness. Then he stopped and dipped his hand into the pockets of his gallant white suit, shivered a little, and leaned forward to speak into the mic. "Oof, it's cold." A cloud of cold air drifted from his mouth as he spoke. "I can see you all in your sweaters, wearing jackets over all of that. Must be quite suffocating. I have my thick white tuxedo weaved by the continent's best to shield me from the cold. Wish it could go around really, but I will have to give this speech naked. Ha ha." Chuckles resonated in the hall after the principal's awkward speech. Northern, however, did not find anything funny. Who starts a speech like that? The principal continued, oblivious to anyone's thoughts on his opening speech. The cold usually is not fair on all of us in this season, but it is a companion nevertheless. A reminder that even in discomfort, we find strength in unity. It pushes us to seek warmth, not just in thick jackets or white tuxedos, but in the bonds we forge with one another. The principal's voice carried a calm, measured cadence that filled the hall, his words laced with an air of wisdom. The Milwa Festival is more than a celebration. It is a tradition rooted in our history, a reminder of the day this academy was founded to serve as a beacon of hope, a sanctuary where all who sought strength, whether of body, mind, or spirit, could cultivate their potential. He paused, letting his words settle in the quiet hall before continuing. This festival is also a chance to honor those who came before us, who laid the foundation for what we stand on today. Their sacrifices, their courage, their triumphs. They live on in the legacy we uphold. And it is up to each of you, as students and future leaders, to continue this legacy. His gaze swept across the crowd, lingering on certain individuals with a weight that seemed to pierce through their thoughts. You all stand at the threshold of greatness, but let me remind you, true greatness is not found in strength alone. It lies in purpose, in the resolve to protect, to grow, and to build a better tomorrow. The principal leaned back slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Today, the Milwa Festival celebrates more than just our founding. Celebrates you, Every contest, every performance, every effort put into making this day special reflects your determination and spirit. Win or lose, the experience will shape you. So, I urge you, take part, cheer for your peers, and cherish these moments. They will define not only your time here but the paths you choose to walk in the future. Another pause, this time accompanied by a shiver as the cold seemed to bite a little deeper. He chuckled lightly, adjusting his stance. Now, before I freeze up here, let me officially declare the start of the Milwa Festival. Let it be a day of joy, challenge, and unity. With that, he stepped back from the lectern, his hand motioning toward the instructors behind him. A round of applause erupted in the hall, a few cheers punctuating the otherwise controlled claps. Northern remained silent, his eyes blinking. Then he suddenly began to clap heavily. His applause resounded the most. What the hell? That was so cool. Chapter 720. The Festival Briefing. The instructor's voice echoed through the hall, calm yet laden with a weight that made every word seem heavier. The Milwa Festival is built upon three essential pillars, each representing the spirit of competition and survival. This year, however, will not adhere to tradition in the way you might expect. The rules remain the same, yes, but the path you will take has become far more dangerous and challenging. He paused, glancing down at the book resting on the lectern. The dim, golden light danced across his sharp, stern features, his gray eyes cold and inscrutable. Due to the heightened severity of this year's festival, the registration process will follow stricter protocols. That being said, these changes are minor. Participation is still open to all regardless of the risk. However, any student with a D-class talent or lower will be required to sign a legal waiver before entering. A murmur of voices erupted like a wave crashing against stone. Confusion and frustration rippled through the crowd. A legal agreement for what? Why do they have to single us out? It's not our fault we drew the short straw with D-class talents. Northern glanced around, his lips curling downward in faint pity. Poor, clueless souls. The instructor remained silent as the protests grew louder, his expression unwavering. Then, with deliberate precision, he reached for the long microphone at his side. His fingers coiled around its neck, and with a sharp twist, he wrenched a screeching noise from the speakers that tore through the hall like a banshee's wail. The crowd recoiled, clutching their ears and groaning in discomfort. Northern winced but couldn't help smirking at the chaos. What a way to get everyone's attention. As the sound dissipated, the instructor tapped the mic twice, the sharp clicks echoing through the now silent hall. Clearing his throat, he resumed his speech with the same measured tone, entirely unfazed by the outrage he'd just quelled. Now that we have your attention, let us proceed to the first contest, he said, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. Monster hunting. As per tradition, cohorts will consist of 4 participants. However, this year's format will not be a simple wide-area hunt. Instead, each cohort will venture into a rift, alone. A collective gasp rippled through the students, their murmurs now tinged with genuine fear and unease. Northern's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, noting the shifting expressions as realization dawned. A rift was no ordinary hunting ground. It was a death ground. The instructor allowed the murmurs to linger for a moment before continuing. This adjustment, of course, explains the legal waivers. We must ensure the academy is protected from liability should weaker students insist on participating despite the obvious risks. Northern clicked his tongue in annoyance, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. How convenient. Just throw the responsibility back onto the students and wash your hands of it. The instructor's gray eyes swept across the room, his gaze like steel cutting through the murmurs. Because of the festival's limited duration, the first contest will span only 3 days. At the end of this period, all participants will be extracted from their respective rifts. The team with the highest number of kills will be declared the winner of the first contest. A hush fell over the room as the instructor's words sank in. Additionally, he continued, his voice cold and deliberate, The first 3 teams to exceed 50 confirmed kills will receive significant bonus rewards. Bear that in mind. Northern smiled, crossing his arms as he studied the man at the lectern. The instructor flipped to another page in his book, his expression unchanging. The second stage of the contest, as usual, shall be a showcase of skill. However, the authorities will be giving everyone a quest to fulfill, to ensure fairness among all students. He flipped to the next page. As for the last stage of the contest, the cohort duel, there shall also be a significant change. Unlike before, where cohort members could choose whom they wanted to fight, this year, once you step onto the arena, you will not step down until you are defeated. The win of each cohort will be calculated by how long a single member stays in the arena. After that, the results shall be combined, and on the last day of the week, the ceremony day, the announcement shall be made. The instructor turned to another page and stayed silent for a few seconds. Murmurs rose as his silence prolonged. For the first time since he stepped onto the podium, Northern noticed an emotion on his face. His eyebrows creased as an unpleasant expression settled on his face for a very brief, almost unnoticeable moment. Then he raised his head. As his voice rang out from the hall speakers, the murmurs died down. The last change is the most interesting and significant one. He paused. Silence drowned out the entire hall as every single soul waited in anticipation to hear what he had to say. Even Northern. And it came. The festival shall be held outside the academy grounds. Ignoring his bland announcement, the entire hall erupted into chaos with screams and jumps. Students threw their hands into the air and jumped with immense energy, hugging each other and rejoicing together. Northern and probably a few others were the only ones not jumping and celebrating as the other students did. It did not mean they were not happy, though. Northern, for example, was very skeptical about jumping lest he shatter a crack into the floor of the hall. And even if he wanted to, he would never jump. Why the hell would I do that? Other students probably had reasonable reasons like him. Northern averted his gaze from them and fixed his eyes on the instructor. It's good news. Why did he look displeased by it? Especially for Northern, this created an opportunity for a much larger stage because the fact that it was now open meant that guests from far and wide across the Central Plains, perhaps even other continents, would make their way to the ceremony. Not just that, but citadels and even the government. Everyone would be available to watch the contest, eager to note down potential talents and prodigies to hunt down at all cost. This was an avenue to make a lot of money from entry tickets and make their fame grow even more, although the academy was renowned enough. All this was good, but the instructor was displeased by it. Why?